sentence. Everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Near me, I keep feeling like we're pulling out of a side street with an air.
You could do it. First up on the agenda is a presentation of the proposed Irvington School Bond and capital project update from Dr. Christopher Harrison, Superintendent of Schools. Welcome.
Yes, good evening, and thank you for having us. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleague, Carol Stein, Assistant Superintendent for Business and Operations, who will be joining me in the presentation. And of course, Deb Hargraves, who is one of our board trustees, as well as a member of the Buildings and Grounds Committee that's been a critical part of this important process for the school district. I'd like to begin just by stating that this has really been a community effort with lots of community involvement along the way. And this presentation, we want to leave it as a resource. We've done this publicly at Board of Education meetings. It has been a lengthy hour-long presentation, so we're going to hit a bunch of the high points for you.
145.
Yeah, and so we're certainly going to scale it back the best we can, and Carol's going to jump in throughout the process, and I invite Deb to. But some of the points that we want to touch on today is why it's important to have a capital project now, a little bit of an overview of that process that I referenced before. The scope of work will be the primary target of my conversation this evening, and then some of the project costs and related timelines. That said, it's really important for us as a school district to do this now for a number of different reasons. First being, we have tremendous needs. When we look at our school facilities, each of our school buildings, there's work that needs to be done, just like in our personal homes. And when we think about that work, some of it jumps right out. Paving, we have potholes, we have roof work, and things like that need to be done. But also safety and security is at the forefront of our minds in today's day and age, so we have a lot of upgrades we want to tackle on that front. And of course, we need to modernize our learning spaces to accommodate student needs and programmatic needs to make sure our learning spaces are really there to complement student learning. And then we have a lot of storage issues in the district, just not enough our items, whether it's for operations or for our student-led programs. So that said, there's another important reason why doing it now, and it relates to our finances. In doing so, we're looking at a budget neutral or tax neutral impact, meaning that we have debt that is expiring in a couple of years. So we want to replace old debt with new debt to be able to keep a level plane of taxation for the district, and for the community, so you're not seeing big jumps in taxes. So we're looking at in 22-23 seeing our annual debt payments drop by $1.2 million. So that's expiring. So the objective is to tackle critical needs in the school district at this time, but keeping that level of debt payment flat or even less if at all possible. And when we look to do this, it's also important to note that 90% of the projects that we propose are aidable, meaning we'll get money back from New York State, of about 20% at this point in time. So when we look at this, we also know that if we forego some of this work, it's obviously going to become more expensive down the road. And if we were to take a look at what happens within our general fund, we budget about $178,000, $180,000 a year to tackle smaller scale needs, things that are emerging in the school district, but we can't jump into all of these big items that we're going to talk about this evening within the scope of our operating budget. So that said, we've done a tremendous amount of work. We started last year with an RFP and selected a new architectural firm to partner with the district, a construction management firm that's been working with us now to actually cost out projects for us, and then they'll work with us in managing the projects down the road. We formed a community-based committee, the Capital Project Planning Committee, which was representative not only of Irvington community members, but parents, faculty, staff. So it was a wide array of folks. We have a building condition and survey and building facilities plan that's filed with the State Education Department. We looked at that to make sure that our priorities are all identified in there and that we're addressing those types of things. And then we went through a simple process where we worked through all the needs that were generated by the committee, prioritized them with the Buildings and Grounds Committee, and then we have worked through a very public process with a number of meetings that have occurred at the Board of Education and a few special meetings that we've held as well. So I think I addressed that, yeah. And so when we think about where we are now, we're in that initial phase where we're looking at projects in concept. We're looking at projects that have been estimated based upon the concepts. But at this point in time, we can't develop actual plans because of how financing and planning works with the State Education Department. So once a bond is approved, we'll be able to delve in and have real specific plans the community will be able to see and provide feedback, and the Board of Education and Administration will announce what that process would look like following a bond approval. So currently, everything that we're looking to present is a figure just shy, as you can see, of $19 million. And again, we'll break that out further, and it's in the handouts available for the community. But again, this is a figure that when we look to finance a bond, it'll fall under that $1.2 million figure, thus being tax neutral. So when we look at our overall scope of work, we started with that list of projects in our capital plan that the district maintains, and we had 52 projects that were identified by our committee. And in working through them, we've been able to fold almost every one of those projects into this capital plan here. And in doing so, they fell into 4 areas: first, safety and security, infrastructure needs, energy efficiency, and modernization of learning space. The safety and security initiative, we have a number of things that we're looking to tackle. As many folks know, we have an open campus, and we value that open feel that we have, but we want to make sure that we have a place that is secure for our students, not only when we think of those scary times that we see on television or read about in the news, but when you have simple environmental concerns, if you have a coyote running around outside, that we don't have to lock down our school, that our students can still go about their business and learn during the school day. Unfortunately, if we have a scary situation or something not as scary that's an environmental concern, such as a coyote scenario, we actually have students and staff that are locked down in buildings and cannot move. What we're looking to do is actually to identify single points of entry and kind of build walls that would close off the open spaces while leaving the interior of the campus open for our students to have that similar feel that it does today. We're looking at a new entry at the high school, security vestibules at each of the other schools as well as the high school. When we think of a security entrance, as we have to go through a couple of different security throughout that process. The installation of additional security cameras, improved signage, lighting at the campus and Main Street School, and a card access system or a swipe card system to gain access to the schools, but also in the interior of our schools. And on the interior side, there'd be benefit because we'd be able to lock down the building in an emergency much more rapidly. And then safety film on windows to prevent slow entry if there was to be a bad situation. So just a couple images of our schools where we have open spaces at the campus right now. And again, where those areas are on an architectural rendering. And just some simple illustrations. And any of the images that you see in this presentation, I just kind of want to go on record saying that they're just sketches, illustrations. Real design work will happen after a bond referendum, but some samples of what they can look like, that they're not going to be walls or barriers. They can be open, spacious looking spaces with windows that people can see through. But the key here is that folks that school without going through the proper vetting process at the new vestibules that would be constructed. And again, another example of one of those entrances. At the high school right now, where the middle school has its own designated entrance, the visitors to the high school actually enter right by the MAR gym and the library, and you walk into the middle of the school building. And by doing so, there's no one to slow you down to get in to vet you. You're already in the building by the time you arrive. But then once you're admitted to the building, you have to traipse halfway across the campus to be able to get to your destination. So we want to look for an opportunity to be able to create a dedicated opening here at the middle school, at the high school. And in doing so, you can see an illustration of what a security vestibule would look like. We'd have to go through the 2 sets of doors while being vetted by our security guard. But when we look at the current entrance, we can all recognize that it's not ADA compliant. So that is something that we want to tackle through this project as well. So in doing so, we're looking at changing the elevations in front of the high school. And by we create a beautiful new entry to the school that would bring you right into the main part of the school. It's ADA compliant, and we'd have a proper security vestibule to vet all of our visitors. And we're also looking to revamp the parking space by changing the traffic flow. We'd be able to add something that is so critical here in Irvington, additional parking spots. While it's only 8 or 9 spots, 8 or 9 spots are worth 100 in some other towns, I believe. That said, we're looking at changing this layout, and in doing so, with the change in elevations, we'll actually have a traffic calming effect on the traffic and make it safer for our student and staff pedestrians. All of our recommendations for our security have gone through, come from a security audit that we've had with our security partner, Alteris. We recognize that these advancements here recognize industry best practice, but they're not the end-all and be-all to school safety and security. They are really complements that go along with the initiatives that happen in our school. We're regularly focusing on the social and emotional well-being of our students. When we jump to infrastructure, there's a number of projects that we're looking at. District-wide, there's lots of site work and paving. Simply looking at the fact that we got to pave driveways, parking lots, and redo sidewalks. We have a small roof at Dow's Lane above the library that needs to be replaced. We have some floor abatement work that needs to be done at both of the elementary schools. We want to renovate some bathrooms at the high school that are beyond their really purposeful life now. There's a waste Street School that we need to address.
Historic.
Historic, yes, that's well said, Mr. Mayor. And then looking at some additional walkway repair work here at Main Street School, where we're going from the main building to the gymnasium building where it's failing, and then some service upgrades at Main Street School. Just because of the age of the building, it needs more power. So when we look at this also, we're looking at some additional needs. Before, I referenced the need for storage, something that has been much talked about in this project, and we've received such incredible feedback from our community that we're actually looking at a totally different plan than we originally presented. And in doing so, it's a decentralized approach. One, rather than building one central location, which we were initially looking at, which would have been more cost-effective in some ways, but it would have housed all of our maintenance headquarters, essentially, and materials and supplies and equipment at Dow's Lane. Based upon the feedback from members of the community, we're actually looking at building a small building directly behind the high school where we'll be able to store equipment with one bay where we could pull one vehicle in to service it, and then a small equipment storage shed behind Dow's Lane. We're also looking at building a small storage building alongside of Mazzaro's Field and Ole Track. That building not only will store our athletic equipment that now sits outside in the elements, but it would have a concession area, so we don't have our pedestrians running back and forth through the parking lot to buy a snack during a sporting event, but it'll have public restrooms as well, which will be a tremendous resource for our community, but also adds a layer of security because we're not keeping our buildings open during a sporting event. Our bleachers are beyond their useful life. They're not ADA compliant, so we're looking to actually take out the bleachers. We have both sides of the field, and I'll show you in a moment, put bleachers on the other side of the field as well. So there's site work associated with that. We're going to replace the fence around the Ole Track. We're also looking to create an outdoor rest. So not only would it be useful during the school day when our youngest students are outside for recess time, but again, when we have athletic activities that are going on after hours or weekends, it would be a resource for all of our community members. We're looking to resurface the basketball court that's at Dow's Lane that we've learned is such a valuable resource for our school community. And in doing so, we are not changing its footprint. We're looking at resurfacing it exactly where it is today. The bell tower on top of Main Street School, we're looking to restore that. And then throughout this project, we're also leaving an allowance for additional landscaping and planting of trees to make sure that we're being environmentally aware and beautifying our campuses. Let's go through a few pictures of some of the failing infrastructure that we have. You can see some of the paving work, a rooftop that needs to be replaced. A bathroom, and just coincidentally when Gary went, order sign on the door. So, and the bell tower, of course. Our current bleachers, you can see on both sides, they're not in the greatest of shape, and as I referenced, not compliant with code today. And the current little tiny storage building, and whether you call it a press box or a tower that is utilized for sporting events, is beyond its useful life. So we're currently looking at, if you can look at the illustration, you can see we put one section of bleachers on what is now the home side of the field. And this is just an illustration, but if you picture our hillside, much of this will be set right into the hillside. So this isn't going to be something that protrudes and stands out grandly, but it'll be something that will be recessed into the hill front. So this is something that we're looking to construct in this project. And to the far right, you can see the yellow squares. We were looking to build that athletic storage facility that will also have the public restrooms and a concession stand, and an illustration of what that. Right now, we store our equipment in shipping containers or outside, which certainly does not serve us well or the equipment well, and it really leads to some impractical use, let alone the eyesore that's there. So in the construction of some outdoor space, storage space, we'll be able to do away with much of what you see around our school grounds today. When we think about this need, we have a number of vehicles in the district. You can see 4 trucks with salt spreader, riding mowers, and snow blowers and the like. And then all of the tools that you picture a maintenance team having that we would need places to store. And again, our vehicles aren't going to be stored inside. We're going to leave them where they currently are, distributed around the district. But when there's a need to service them on a regular basis, or when I think of Gary and his crew in the midst of a snowstorm and you have a truck or equipment failure, they have that ability to pull it into a garage and work on it as opposed to lying down in the dark in the snow and trying to fix it. So as I referenced before, we're looking at a decentralized approach with a building behind the high school. You can see it's not a grand building by any scale. About 1,100 square feet is what we're looking at. It's something, again, that'll be built into the hillside. If you picture the land being elevated about 10, 12 feet behind the high school, it'll be built into that hill front. We're also going to regrade the land right near that to allow for better emergency access for emergency vehicles such as fire trucks should there be an emergency on the campus as well. And then a second building would be stored directly, created right behind the district office area of Dow's Lane, which would be just above where the cafeteria is. We're looking at about a 10 by 20 building that we'd construct right back there that would store grounds equipment and other tools for our maintenance crew. And then here's an illustration. If you could picture at the top of the screen is actually the original high school building with the driveway that comes up and around where the building would be constructed, and the dashed lines that you can see there are where the regrading would occur to provide for that emergency access that I referenced earlier. And at Dow's Lane, you can see at the top left of the screen, the yellow square is where that small storage shed would be constructed just off the current driveway. And then where you see the 2 other yellow rectangles towards the center and the bottom of the screen, those are the proposed locations where we're looking at the outdoor restrooms. So we're looking at 2 different options. The one is directly attached to the school building, as you can see. That construction is actually more costly than a standalone facility. If we find that to not be practical, we're actually going to create a standalone building, and if we do so, we're actually looking to have some fun with it and making it an educational experience and engage some partners in the community to try to make it an environmental type project. If we can integrate some solar into it, possibly composting toilets, to put a bottle refilling station on the outside. So if we go with that latter route, and Carol gave an illustration of what the facility may actually look like, that we'll have that opportunity for further community engagement and to be creative with the project. And just an illustration of the basketball area that would be worked on in the general area where the other facility shed would be constructed behind Dow's. And if you remember the days of many old modular buildings or portable classrooms that were outside, we have 1 from those days remaining. With this project, the last one would come down. So when we think of energy efficiency and air conditioning, and there's a slash there because we recognize one may not directly align with the other. There's a number of projects here that will help improve the environments in our schools. The first being replacing a boiler at Dow's Lane. We're actually running on 1 boiler for that entire facility right now. We're looking at replacing some exterior wall and window shade panels at the school that are not only beyond their useful life at this point, but they provide a shade for the building inside. replacing univents, which are the blowers in the classrooms in the original high school building. By doing so, of course, there's more efficiency. We're upgrading controls across the school, installing solar film on windows. We're replacing all of our lights in the district with LED lighting, which not only will be certainly less of a strain on our electrical bills and immediately result in a significant savings year one, but obviously will minimize our reliance on electricity. And then finally, we're looking at air conditioning a series of large spaces in each of our schools to provide our students and staff some additional relief. So just some pictures of aging boilers and the like, and some of the equipment to be replaced. We looked at actually what the cost would be to provide central air conditioning across the entire district, and when we had some back of the envelope estimates from our engineers and architects, and we saw a figure of $8.5 million, we know that we needed to stop. So Mr. Knowles, our Director of Facilities, who's now in the audience, along with Mr. Hanna, Board President, welcome, did an inventory of our current air conditioning in the district, and we're actually going to come up with a plan to air condition classrooms over a 2 to 3 year window through our operating budget, as opposed to the capital project. So I referenced the LED lighting. Obviously, the numerous savings that are, I think, quite obvious to all of us, and it's a project that we'd be able to undertake pretty quickly after a bond is approved. But energy efficiency doesn't stop here. While there are some initiatives tied to the project, there's a lot of other things that we're going to tackle on our own, and we're going to explore different opportunities down the road, such as solar opportunities for power agreements and the like that could save the district money, all things that will be explored in the future. So the modernization of learning spaces, there's a bunch of areas that we're going to focus on. We're going to reconfigure and modernize libraries at Dow's and at the campus. We're going to have some upgrades to our campus theater. We're going to upgrade science and computer labs at Main Street and the middle school. And then when we say casework, it's just picture storage type devices in many classrooms, particularly in our art and music classrooms. So when we look at Dow's Lane, there's the footprint of our existing library. We're actually going to create what we call a creativity suite, where we'll take the actual library space that we have, create 2 STEM labs where we have our science, technology, engineering, mathematics programs that are currently ongoing, Project Lead the Way, move them into that space and re-envision what the library looks like to make it flexible to accommodate different types of activities. And we have some illustrations of what it looks like today, and ideas of what it can look like in the future, which that to us just gets us excited to picture students in those spaces. And then looking at our campus library, similar, it's a very standard-looking library with stacks that aren't movable and one big open space that doesn't accommodate different types of learning and different types of collaboration that we see in our schools today. So in looking at this space, you can see an illustration where we're actually looking to segment the library, but rather than just building walls, it'd be glass partitions. So we could have spaces where students can speak and collaborate, and then still have quiet study spaces. In the orangey section in the front, in the back upper right-hand corner, you can see a couple small collaboration spaces where you can have study groups or small group instruction in an actual classroom within the library. And then looking upstairs, similarly, creating some small spaces where you could have collaboration or small group instruction. And some illustrations of what the spaces could look like after completion. When we're looking at our current, on the right side of the screen is our current STEM room at Main Street School, which is an old science lab, which is not practical for the work today. And on the left, a technology lab or computer lab at Main Street that we're looking to revamp to reflect how we work today. So if we look at the computer classroom, you can see that idea of how we could use furniture in different ways. So one type of desk can be configured into what is a square or individual seating or other shapes to be able to accommodate the instruction, thinking that we don't have fixed computers anymore, that everything is a wireless device that we're using in our schools. Similarly, looking at the space up in the STEM classroom. And some ideas of what those spaces may look like for us in the future. And storage speaks for itself. We don't have a place to put our students' materials or instructional supplies, so we're looking at purchasing or installing a number of items to be able to better organize and make use of the learning spaces. So when we look at where we are, and Carol has worked with our bond advisors extensively to identify where we're looking, and where we see short-term rates increasing, the long-term borrowing is actually holding steady at a low rate. So when we look at where we are today, and again, Carol works very conservatively. As you can imagine, our board has been very cautious throughout this entire process, and in doing so, you can see the range where we fall. And so we're looking at rates that are currently around 3%. So you're looking at the range of where we've been and the amount of money that would correlate to that. And you can see our number was about $18.8 million. So depending on the range and the projections where the advisors could possibly see things going, you can see how we land within that debt neutral or tax neutral range that I referenced earlier. So the current recommendations and how they break out by the individual category that I referenced before. And as referenced, all of these numbers have been generated by looking at real-time construction projects in the region. Triton, our construction manager, manages jobs all over the area, and they have a massive database of jobs throughout the region, so they can see the real labor costs, because we have to, as a public entity, pay prevailing wage, and the cost of materials and supplies for all of the work. So they're giving us real-time prices for jobs that are happening throughout our region today. See how that breaks out, and then of course by school. And this is followed by a series of itemized tables that identify all the costs. As you can imagine, we've built in all the related soft costs, construction management fees, and any contingencies to be able to address any shifts in scope along the way based upon unforeseen situations. Finally, this kind of an overview of what our process has been. It's really been something that's been going on for nearly 2 years now, but it's coming to reality now. We've had a number of public presentations, and I would draw, if Carol, you flip to the next slide, kind of where we've been and where we are. We have important bond vote coming up, of course, in May, and we'll be sending out lots of resources to the community. But in the interim, we would encourage folks to visit the website. We have a page that is dedicated solely to this project, and you can actually look at all the presentations, all the videos related to that, and see the progression of the work over the course of the year. We also have a number of other public forums that we'll have before the actual vote date, so we'll be getting those dates out and encourage community members to come out and learn more and ask their questions.
Great.
Very impressive. And the clock is behind you.
Not
Very
too bad.
impressive.
Yeah, so.
I had 7:30 and you beat it by 4 minutes. So.
Yeah.
We appreciate you getting more of this out. Obviously, I know you've been very open to comments and concerns and all those types of things. So, reach out to you, reach out to Michael, whoever. I know you're all been kind of, you've gotten, as you say, a lot of feedback that's changed the project, made it a better project, hopefully. And
It has.
yeah, and I know that dialogue is continuing. So we appreciate you taking your time out, and all of you for coming here tonight and presenting it to a slightly different audience that maybe doesn't pay attention as much up the hill. But we really appreciate you taking a little extra time again on a non-board meeting night for
That's
you
right.
to come to our board meeting. So
That's great. Well, we appreciate the opportunity, and thank you.
absolutely.
So before you go, Chris, I had one quick question.
Of course.
This is my naivety on these things. At the very beginning, you mentioned how you were looking that a lot of these projects could be, or potential for state reimbursement at 20%.
Yes.
Is that 20% based on our community demographics, or is that,
Yeah, so it's based on the, aid ratios are based on the community's wealth
yeah,
and needs. So we've been anywhere from, 15 up to 30 over the last 10, 15 years. Right now, we're actually going down a little bit to 17.6. It fluctuates though based on our combined wealth and other factors, property values. Our assessed value went up recently in the community, so that's going to actually have a negative impact on the aid ratio. But 3 or 4 years from now, I don't exactly know what that number will be. I'm conservatively using a low number, but it should be around 20 is our guess. So, and it looks at, there's a whole bunch of factors that state aid considers. Not every project will be state aided. The maintenance garage won't be. It's not for students, so they won't aid that. But anything that has directly impacts students will be aided.
all right, thank you. I
Right.
appreciate it.
Thanks again.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sure.
Probably make the announcement for that. We actually only have one announcement, which is to call for a public hearing on the 2019-2020 operating budget for Monday, April 1st, 2019 at 7 p.m. at Village Hall. If I can have a second for that.
Second.
All in favor? Does anybody else have any announcements? Okay. I will go on to correspondence. There's a lot of correspondence, but I think the nice surprise is that most of this I read the last meeting. All of the Airbnb mails were already read, so we don't have to read them again. But so that's the first one from Catherine O'Keefe, who was about the short-term rentals. So I will don't have to read that one. She does have a second one. That's about the Astorbuck plan. She thought it was denied once and for all in May of 2018. She was appalled to hear that they are once again trying to build a parking despite overwhelming resident disapproval. We, the village residents, voted to be back in office, and many of you represented our wishes. As you may not be able to attend the meeting, I would like to take my opinions as a resident of South Buckeye Street under consideration. Under the guise of building affordable housing, Astorbuck plans to sneak in a large parking lot. Ash takes some exception to that. I don't think they're sneaking it in. I think it's still called the Astorbuck parking lot plan. But one way or another, they are determined to get their parking lot built regardless of the wishes of the residents of the village planning board. Hopefully, the board of trustees will finally pay attention to the planning board and the detailed comments of over 250 residents submitted to opposition petition. Astorbuck will propose to build 4 to 8 units of affordable housing and approximately 35 parking spots. The property is currently zoned single-family residential. This was entail a zoning change to multifamily and and/or commercial. The village comprehensive plan, obviously everyone can read, it's a long letter, so you can read it on your own. I'll just get to the summary here. Please do not allow Astorbuck to destroy our neighborhood and negatively impact the health of so many senior citizens that live in Half Moon and endanger the young children that walk on South Buckeye Street by adding traffic noise and pollution. That's Catherine T. O'Keefe. Claire Cornish's short-term rental letter was already read. Robert Bernstein's book was already read. Leola's letter was already read. I know she's here tonight. Welcome, Leola. Then we had Blanchard and Wilson, attorneys for APOA. We read the first one, and they actually presented the first one. The second one was actually a response to Robert Bernstein's long letter. So if you want to read some legal battles, I'll let you do that on your own. They had many submissions here. Let's see, Gordon Fury. This is also about Astorbuck. He's from 99 Bracebridge Lane in Irvington. He asked a bunch of questions. I think we actually answered these all at the work session. Given that the current plans are very different, have they filed a new petition? No, but we would require them to. Have they done a long-form environmental analysis? They did, but they'd have to do it again. Do the Astorbuck plans promote a pedestrian-friendly, environmentally sustainable village? I'd say it has pedestrian friendliness. Is Astorbuck required to deliver a formal and informal notice of the plans to adjacent property owners? I have to assume during the planning board piece they would have to, but not during the zoning change. But
I don't know if they're individually to them, but it'll be presented in the public, it'll be available.
When and for what purpose the village owned Astorbuck lots reserved years ago? And I don't even know the history of that. What does the comprehensive plan say about the purpose of Astorbuck lots as a buffer, if any, between commercial and residential areas? I looked at the last two comprehensive plans, I didn't find anything. It actually talked about adding to the commercial nature down there. What authority does the village have to sell or gift in a particular way as opposed to putting it up for open bid? I think that's our authority, period.
The requirement is to get a fair price for it.
Did Astorbuck obtain tree commission approval of the third cut of strip of land? They did. I think they
Actually, I investigated that. They didn't get permission for clearing in that area, but both Alan and I spoke, Alan of the Tree Commission spoken. Our recollection is that a lot of that wooded area are trees, saplings and trees that are under the proper 8-inch DBH. But there may be, he's going to go check just to be sure there aren't any large stumps.
Okay.
But the misunderstanding was because their permit was for work on the west slope of the Trent Building parking area, of the existing parking area.
They understand Asperbach conducted traffic survey study. Has the village conducted its own? No, because we kind of rejected theirs, so we didn't get that far. However, the utility easements on the lots and how they've been considered in the plans, there's, I think, a large gas easement among others that goes to the big apartment building, and they will be considered in any plans. That was from Gordon Peary. Next one is from Chris Wall. Could you rezone FS zoning for Asperbach to require secret? Yes. What is this? This is about crosswalks, reconsideration regarding a crossing guard at Broadway and Heritage Hill. Dear Mayor, Board of Trustees, members of the school board, my family and I moved to Irvington in December 17. We love Irvington and recently purchased a home on Circle Drive. We're very excited with the prospect of our children being able to walk to school, and we have been sending our 6th grade Zoe and 4th grade son Liam to school on foot. Liam crosses Broadway and Heritage Hill to get to Main Street for an 8:50 start. It was recently brought to my attention that if Liam doesn't cross at the junction before 8:30, there's no crossing guard on duty. And there is a crossing guard there, 7:20 to 8:30, to look out for middle school and high school students. But when he leaves, there says Main Street School, crossing Main Street to the Main Street School. Different range from the crossing at Main Street and Broadway, where the crossing guard remains to help children from 7:55 to 8:55 a.m., thus providing a watchful eye for Main Street School students leading up to the start of their school day. My understanding is the crossing guard at Heritage Hill and Broadway, with Main Street School students walk home in the afternoon. There's a reason I view the absence of guard in the morning as a gap in safety measures. When I brought the discrepancy to the attention of Chief Cerrone, he said the latest crossing guard can stay at Heritage Hill and Broadway is 8:35. Disappointingly, this is still a full 15 minutes before Main Street School starts. I'm requesting that the board and village give the same consideration of safety of Main Street schools for children crossing Broadway and Heritage Hill in the morning as they do for Main Street school students crossing at Broadway and Main. Ideally, there'd be a crossing guard at Heritage and Broadway until 8:55 a.m. The same finish for the crossing guard at Main Street and Broadway. Currently, there are at least 12 Main Street school students living on Circle Drive, Ruby Road, Janet Terrace, and Stearns Ridge. Between Circle Drive, Ruby Road, Janet Terrace, Barber Lane, Stearns Ridge, and Dearman Street, there are at least 18 families with children in 5th grade or younger. So this is a crossing that will be frequented by Main Street school students for years to come. I've contacted and heard back from 14 of these families. Their support is indicated below. I expect to hear from the others soon. Thank you, Melinda Chopular, 56 Circle Drive. We will look into that. And that's it for correspondence.
So she's asking to extend for, what was it, a half an hour or 25 minutes?
Yeah, something like that. I think what the problem is that the person that
is the
does
same
that one goes
person.
to the one that goes to Main Street, so,
It's another, needs another body, yeah.
yeah, we have to figure it out. Next up is public comment.
I just wanted to introduce myself. I wrote the letter about the crossing guard on
Okay.
the Chapelier, so just nice to be here. Thanks for.
If you don't mind coming up so everyone can hear you around the world.
So I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to have these meetings
Sure,
so that I
absolutely.
could come and hear the letter read.
And I'm your neighbor up on River Street. So.
Okay.
And actually, I walk down every morning to the train.
Okay.
And I see Eric Oakley almost every day. Well, actually, typically you don't drive anymore. Not anymore. That's too warm.
Crossing guard.
That's a volunteer.
Yeah, volunteer crossing guards. Cover the 15, 20 minutes we need. But yeah, we'll look into it. I think it's probably a logistics problem with the
Right.
having one person man both spots. So we'll see if we can work out some kind of solution. But,
Okay, thank you.
yeah, thank you. Welcome to Irvington.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Eric Oley. I just wanted to piggyback on Melinda's comments because I spoke with her before the meeting, and I wanted to say I really think that this is kind of a development of all the work we've been doing towards traffic and pedestrian safety. I know with the Safe Routes to School grant, where we really did a great job on Station Road, we also had money to get a grant to start a walking school bus, which we did in 2015. And I think we're seeing that come to fruition now, because I've also heard from people who live in Richmond Hill and Harriman Road, who are concerned about the crossing at Broadway and Harriman Road, because they have younger kids walking to school, 3rd and 4th graders walking to school, which is just, to me, is a fantastic thing. And I happened to go to the crossing at Harriman Road and Broadway today, and there's no walk sign there, and it was really difficult for me to figure out how to. You press a button, but it seems to facilitate a gap in the light change.
For Broadway?
Yeah, but as a child, as an adult, it was very difficult for me to figure that out. I think the light turned green, but it was not a crosswalk light, it was the actual traffic light. But I didn't know, and I was like looking, and there's 4 lanes of traffic, and those people are revving ready to go. And it's kind of the same thing at Heritage Hill and Broadway, where if you go there, I used to walk my kids up there in the morning, and I used to see they were young in 6th grade, but now I don't. But if you go there now, you see people revving their cars, going over the white lines, getting ready to go and pounce. And if I had a 4th grader or 3rd grader just wanted to walk the 300 yards to Main Street School, which they should be able to do safely, I would be really reticent about letting them cross the street by themselves. So I think it's actually a really good problem for us to have, is that more and more kids are walking to school, and I just think it's a problem that we have to deal with. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, Scatter, someone has a clipboard.
Hi, John Dawson, 76 Hudson Avenue. I hope that all of you received the email that my wife and I sent out. I brought with me the petition that we had signed by 42 households in our area, each having 2 to 5 or more voters. Many of the people were willing to come tonight. I said, no, let me try first and see if the board will do anything. 3 years ago, you put in new curbs, and at that time, we were told we were going to get the roads paved. It's 3 years later, we have been overlooked each year. The road is in bad shape. From what we understand, you're about ready to put in more of that kitty litter fill that lasts for about 6 months and then is gone. The road is having a lot of drainage issues and damage along the curbs. The curbs are too high for normal people getting in and out of a car. It's time for us to get what we pay taxes for to have our road paved. I don't think it's that much to ask for. Hudson View Park has not been anything that's been updated in the last 20 years. In 31 years that I've lived up there, we've had our road semi-paved once. They put some kind of new technique down, and it wasn't very effective. I don't think that it's too much to ask, and many of the people would be very, very happy that the village paid attention to this.
Sure.
So-
Yeah, I don't know if you saw my response. I sent it around 5 or so, but we're, as part of the capital budget, we had an engineering plan done, I think, 2016. They kind of prioritized all the roads. They went around and kind of gave they looked at the conditions. We're going to update that as part of our capital budget, and because we want to make sure that they're being prioritized properly. So we'll make sure that your area is checked by the DPW and the engineers.
Can we be told when that's going to happen so we can speak with these people also? Because some of the roads that have been redone in this village are in much better shape than ours.
We can,
I mean, we have to work with the engineers to get the priorities up to date, and there are plenty of other roads that are in worse condition than Hudson View Park, which I'm sure you didn't want to hear. I'm just telling you what our evaluation is. So we're going to update it because we want to make sure that it reflects what the conditions are after this winter particularly. Once we do that, then we'll see how it fits into the capital budget, and then their real work begins when they have all the information.
There are roads that have been repaved in the last 3 years that were not nearly in as bad shape as ours. So somebody's making a mistake in their evaluation somewhere.
Okay. Well, we're gonna look at it again for sure. You can look at the evaluation yourself. It's on our website if you're interested.
any other public comment? Otherwise, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Anyone have any questions? No? And then I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. There was a film permit in there, which was,
Retroactive, right?
yeah. Now, one of our more exciting
There's like
public
a
hearings.
4-hour window.
I'll make a motion to open the hearing for a public hearing to consider local law amending the zoning code definition of person. If I can get a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Might not qualify.
I'm gonna find out.
Very quickly, it's a technical amendment to update the definition of person in the zoning code. Right now, it's defined to just include a person or corporation and leaves out a number of entities like partnerships and associations. So what the amendment does, it defines a person as an individual as well as a corporation, partnership, firm, association, joint venture, and organization of any type. So every time the word person shows up in the code, that's how it's defined.
Could be any of those uses.
Well, not the whole code, the zoning code.
Okay.
Is there any questions on this?
No, that's a good catch.
Does any one of the public have any questions on this? Leola does.
Who wants to be a person? Well, this is a bit silly, I realize, and I don't think it's time to change it or anything, but.
Leola from North Castanet Street. In Ecuador, the environment is the person. And as I read it, I meant to write to you and I didn't. But I don't suppose that would be covered in this update, right?
No.
Okay.
No, it also probably wouldn't work. I mean, whatever in Ecuador, I mean, it's probably.
Like a corporation has rights, but the environment doesn't. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have rights, but when you're
That's
talking
correct.
about a person doing something, it's,
Yeah.
no.
Welcome to Citizens United.
It is cool, though.
Corporations are
Cool idea.
persons, but not the environment.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for entertaining my question.
Please, I'm glad. I got lost with the over under 0 people. Anyone else want to talk about people? Otherwise, I will make a motion to close the public hearing. Wait a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Resolved to adopt the local law amending the Irvington zoning code's definition of person. I'll make a motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's the fastest we've ever, well, maybe not, someone did talk about it. Now we'll continue a public hearing requesting a special permit for adaptive reuse of the historic building at 45 West Line Avenue. Marion, did you have any update for us on this? or-
No, there really isn't. I can just give you a little bit of an update, which is that the applicant has continued to work with the building department. I know they've made a lot of good progress. There will probably be a little tweak here and there to what they originally asked for and what the discussions have been, and what, as you know, we have a draft of the resolution, which I know you're in the process of reviewing, so there may be some little tweaks to that, but nothing major. But the plan is to get to the point where that resolution is in a final draft form, and you can consider it at your next meeting on April 1st. The public hearing would still be open, so people will have a chance to look at what the conditions are and what the circumstances are, and still make comment. That's it.
Okay. Next, we'll continue a public hearing to consider a local law. Oh, any public comment on that, or, sorry, I figured we didn't talk about anything, so. Next is continue a public hearing to consider local law amending the Irvington zoning code to permit short-term rentals. Can you give us an update, is that right?
Yeah, since the last draft, the board heard comments from the public and talked about it at a work session last week, and so in response, I made a few changes. I'll explain what those are. There had been a limit on the number of short-term rentals that could be registered at any one time at 30. A lot of people said that wasn't enough, so that was up to 50. But the board, understanding that, you know, if it gets close to that number, it may need to adjust it, but 50 seemed reasonable. And then the maximum number of days a dwelling can be rented out as a short-term rental was 90 days. That's been increased to 180 days in response to a number of comments and the board's discussion on it. Then on the fines were detailed in this code rather than just referring to the general fine section, so that the fine for first violation would be $500, the fine for a second violation would be $1,000. And then there's a provision on, there was a revocation of registration procedure before, but this is a little bit more specific. So it says, in addition to any penalties you could get, you know, for these violations, the Board of Trustees may revoke the registration of any short-term rental if, first, it finds that the short-term rentals to be in material breach of the requirements of this article, so that would be irrespective of whether there was a court proceeding. and then, or if the operator of the short-term rental is found guilty of 2 violations of this article, then it would be revoked. Well, then it wouldn't automatically be revoked. We have to come to this board, and then the board would have a hearing and revoke.
Irrevocable.
So those are the changes made. Otherwise, it's the same. And because these changes are substantive, it'll get republished, and the public hearing then should continue till the next meeting.
I'd say one other thing we did discuss was the fee. There was some feedback that the fee was too high, but especially for the original inspection, we felt that it required so much time from the building department that it's probably, the $250 probably won't even cover all the time required, so.
Yeah, and what was at least some board members were confused, and maybe some people in the public were confused, is that you only pay the $250 if it's actually registered. If you apply, you have to, it's not an application fee, so if you apply and you don't get your registration, you don't have to pay that $250.
Right. Any other comments from the board? Unless we'll open up to the public.
No, just once again, as with parking, this was a process where people have very strong positions and feelings, but people respectfully listened to each other, and there was a sense of a growing understanding of what the issues were for different stakeholders in this.
Okay, I'll open up to the public. Anyone else have to talk about? Peter?
Hi, Peter Bernstein from 17 North Cottonette. Well, firstly, I applaud you for working on this, and it's looking much better. Looks good to me. I had one question, I'm sure you guys have discussed it, that seems probably not practical. From my view, is the 30 minutes on complaints, on responding to complaints. I mean, if someone's on an airplane, they're not going to be able to respond. So, I know you guys have had work sessions, so I presume we've discussed that, but it just doesn't seem practical to
It doesn't
respond
have to
in 30
necessarily be the owner. It could be a designee.
Yeah.
So we almost,
We'll have to
the way we look at it
designate
is like, if you're renting out your house and someone doesn't know how your remote control works, there's usually someone they can talk to. So it doesn't have to necessarily be, if you rent out your house, that doesn't have to be Peter Bernstein. It can be, your designee, as long as they have a number of someone they can reach.
Right, but that might not be practical either. I mean, how many contingent notifications, because people aren't going to sit at home waiting for a complaint, right? Things are working well, so I just, like I could be on a plane and my contingent person could be on a train in the tunnel and not, have a signal. It just, I'm not saying it shouldn't be respond in a reasonable time. Someone who rents out Airbnbs, if something's wrong with the place and I need something resolved, I want it resolved, that day. But I can understand that people, 30 minutes is just a short time for either the primary renter or a contingent, unless how many are you going to list?
Sure.
So that's my only comment. Other than that, I think it's.
Yeah, thanks.
It's good.
3 days then.
What's that?
Put three, 3 cell phones.
30 is the magic number.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes for your contacts to be able to find the configuration that will allow a 30-minute response, because if you're the person in the next house and there's a wild party going on, 30 minutes is going to seem like a really long time.
Yeah, well, in that, I would presume that, somebody could call the police,
Oh, yeah,
right?
of course.
So that, the police who are, 24/7 paid to be available to respond to things, I don't think it's unreasonable for the police to show up within 30 minutes, but for, somebody who may, and then be renting out their place and not necessarily be available that quickly. It's just a short period of time. I mean, Larry's a doctor. You're in surgery. You're not gonna, leave the surgery to respond to something. And if the contingent person, even if there's 2, and somebody's on a plane and somebody, it just, not everybody is reachable so quickly. That's my opinion. My humble opinion.
Hi, Deb Hargraves, Washington Avenue in Irvington. I just had a couple of questions how this actually worked, and I'm reading it for the first time, so bear with me. So as it's presently written, a person who's interested in having a short-term rental in their home would go to the building department to fill out an application, pay the fee, and then they have the right to rent their home for a
They pay
maximum,
the fee.
You don't pay the
no
fee.
fee
You don't have to
at
pay
the
yet,
outset.
not until you get approved.
Once you get approved. And then at the outset, once they obtain the right to have a short-term rental in their home, they can rent for 180 days per year, or in other words, 180 times per year. They could do one-night rentals. So there could be potentially 180 different times they're renting. And within that 180 times, if there's 2 violations, then does the neighbor go to the building department?
The neighbor can go to pretty much anybody.
But who should the neighbor go to? I was wondering how the law's drafted.
I would guess that they'd go to the police, and the police would give it to Larry. You know,
So the-
if something like a party or something like that, call the police. The police would respond to that immediate, incident and, shut it down if it's loud or whatever. And then that would get referred to Larry
Okay.
from the police department.
And then, so there's,
Administrative piece of it.
so they call the police, the police will then inform Larry, maybe the neighbor who's complaining informs Larry, and then in order to move to revoke the permit that's been issued, then the neighbor just writes a letter to the Board of Trustees and shows up and waits for it to come on the
I
agenda?
don't think the neighbor even has, it's more like it'll be an administrative decision from upstairs, like.
I would say they could,
They
let's
could,
say
yeah.
somebody knew and they wanted to, there was a real problem, they came to the board and said, listen, I think you should revoke this hearing, the thing because of that. Or if it comes to Larry's attention or any of the board members' attention or the police attention, they might say, hey, you should look into this and,
So it's kind of, it's like different ways to go.
So there's different ways, it's not all laid out.
Okay, because I'm wondering how the neighbors who may have a problem, since there is 180 opportunities for somebody to have a problem, and you only need 2 in order to
Yeah.
make a move to say, we need to revoke this.
Yeah.
How do we know what's the best approach? And is that going to be laid out somewhere so that somebody
I
can
think some
follow
of
it?
it
No.
depends, like if they're leaving out their garbage cans or something like that,
Mhm.
then that might be, you call, the clerk or the building department or Larry. If it's parties, noise, drug use, even parking issues,
Parking,
all those types of things that are kind of more criminal, for lack of a better term, then just call the police immediately and deal with it short term, and then the longer term will be, should this person be allowed to rent out their house anymore?
Right. And at that point, they come before, so a neighbor could potentially come before this board and make the argument, and then
Yeah.
this board, but, so in other words, the building department's not going to revoke it, really, the way the
Board of
law is written, the
Trustees
board of
does.
trustees does.
And some, like, I'm thinking of an example where we have, X number of persons. So let's say a neighbor observes that there's actually 14 people there. They're not having parties, but there's an awful lot of people, and that's clearly a violation. They might then come directly to us or go directly to Larry. It might not be a police matter.
Okay. And last question, in some of the laws I had looked at, there was an obligation on the part of the building department to make sure that this home had carbon monoxide detectors, smoke alarms. That's built into this as well, to
You
make
have
sure there's an
pass
inspection?
The New York, yes, you have to pass the New York State codes, which are, if you've read some of it, they're pretty strict. They're made to eliminate things like, renting out your 3rd floor attic and there's no egress and things like that. So I think that that's going to be an interesting piece of this law, is that to comply with it, it's not just going to be any house can do it. And the way New York State looks at it, if you do it for more than 30 days, the person gets comfortable there and they know the way around. But if it's kind of that quick turnover, you're turning around, you're there for 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights, you have to have certain things to make it safer for them
That's what I
that
thought.
are disoriented.
Okay, and that falls on the building inspector to make sure
That's
that's all
correct.
set
That's
up.
why we
Okay.
get the $250 fee, because they have to go in and inspect for, there's different ways, there's many ways to skin a cat. If you have, 2 doors out of the bedroom, if it goes outside, you're probably okay. Otherwise, you might need sprinklers. It depends on what it is, but it's not just like you just sign up and get a permit, which is why we have to have the higher fee, because it takes work.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Okay.
And that's obviously beyond our control. That's New York State came up with some laws. I think it was in 2008 or 2009 that they came up with them, but it's very similar to having a bed and breakfast. It's almost the same because they want same kind of safety. Sorry, Bill.
That's actually a point that I wanted to talk about. But before I do, interesting that Peter's my neighbor, but I didn't know you were going to talk about this. It's also the same thing for me. The 30-minute response. So I was wondering if other homeowners or anyone else has to be available in 30 minutes. And I was also having the thought that we have 24-hour fire, police, all that sort of thing. And so I'm not exactly sure what the purpose is. So Airbnb, for example, is self-policing, and if a host did not respond, you know, within, or the backup host, and that's all very good because, you know, of course you want to back up, you know, to help the guests or neighbors or if something comes up. But the practical, you know, risking penalty for not responding within 30 minutes just feels really unfair and unnecessary.
How long do you think it takes typically to respond? Like if someone called and said, hey, there's no hot water, like how long do you think it would typically be? Like what would be a kind of a normal response time for something like that? Or, you know, the lights are out in the basement, whatever, I'm making something out that, whoever it is, again, it doesn't have to be you, it's somebody else. Like what do you think, what's a reasonable time? Like where would someone on Airbnb say they're unresponsive? I mean, maybe it's not 30 minutes, but what's the timing? If I don't have, you know, there's no running water in my Airbnb, I now call the person that, there's a number, call, you know, not Leola because she's in France sunning herself, but call the manager or whoever it is that's appointed. Like, what do you think the reasonable time is?
Well, you know, it's a little bit subjective. Some people are more tolerant than others, and so the expectation is that your Airbnb host or co-host would respond quickly, but you know, again, I'm just thinking in a real emergency, fire and police. So it's
not to like let the, it's not for like the police or fire to get onto your property. It's more people just got here from Ecuador and they're staying in the house, and now the police show up because there's a broken pipe, and you know the fire alarm goes off because there's a water flow. The fire department's there. The poor people that just got here, that they're freaking tired from their flight, they're like, you know, I don't know who the plumber is. So that's kind of like the next step is, you know, this way when, you know, the fire department's there saying, I need to talk to the homeowner or the manager or whatever, they have that kind of response time. It's not to let them in for a fire, but it's more, okay, now there is a major broken pipe, all the pipes are for whatever it is. You need to talk with someone who has the authority to fix things or rectify situations.
I think, my experience, there's responding quickly and then a communication about how quickly it has to be resolved. So I think those are two different things. Yes, you responded and said, okay, I heard that there are bees out in the yard, but you guys are inside for the night, nobody's outside, right? So it's fine. We don't have to do anything now, right? So there's responding without, I solved it right away. But as Brian is bringing up an example of a broken pipe of some sort, then respond and do something about it quickly would be appropriate. So I think it's possible to respond and then evaluate.
Sure.
I'm kind of reading this.
Just like any other homeowner would, right? Like they're both at work, nobody's around, you know, of course you want to respond as quickly as you can, but from a practical
matter. There's a different level of responsibility from an individual homeowner in their own home and someone who is renting out a short-term rental to a different individual in the neighborhood.
Also, another aspect of this is we don't want our police and fire department inappropriately called, to use your example. Officer, there are bees in the backyard, you know, so there, you know, and again, I understand, people are on planes, people are traveling. I think the issue here, remember, we're trying to create a regulation that people will buy into, both the people who want to rent, the people who want to rent, and the people who want to have Airbnbs, and the people who don't want that. And certainly part of this is balancing, you know, what would be the comfort level of people who want no part of this on their block. If we can say there's a limited number, they have to pass inspection, there is a requirement for the person who's profiting from this to respond quickly or make sure that there's a list of phone numbers or whatever so that we can guarantee that before it gets into our system, it is being handled by the people who are renting it out. Part of the reason for that is so that the community as a whole will buy into this notion.
Okay, I know Peter has a comment about this too, but again, I just want to go back to, and I realize that there's a little bit more of responsibility if you're renting your home versus a regular homeowner, and the practicality is that probably an Airbnb host would respond faster than most homeowners because they really care about that. But to be penalized, just on the odd chance that, no one's available within 30 minutes.
Not immediately invoked. It means
Yeah.
that we can hear what the circumstances are.
Yeah.
Then my guess
Okay.
too is it's not, the police aren't gonna go, hey, we've now responded, start the stopwatch, it's 30 minutes, it's gonna be, if they can't get in touch with you and it's suddenly 2.5 hours later, it's not gonna be, stopwatch time, so to me, it's a standard that.
So it's not an automatic violation or something?
No.
Okay, because that was what concerned me. It's
There's no
just
discretion.
so unlikely,
But I certainly want people to hear this loud and clear. The 30 minutes means if you are renting out your house, you've got to provide enough contact, so you know where you're going, you know where your neighbors are going, you have to make sure you've got reachable people.
And I think that's part of the urgency of it, is saying that this isn't like, if we said you had to respond within 3 days, to me, that's like, it's too far the other way. This kind of creates an urgency that, you're going to have to make sure that you have someone on call.
Yeah,
It's like-
the urgency's already there, but okay. Yeah.
You're already doing
And that's-
Yeah.
When we talked about this, like.
Any homeowner would want to respond
It's just too
fast.
short. We feel like, from our own experience with short-term rentals, that there's almost always somebody reachable that, for anything, like the pool's heater's not working, I don't know how to turn on the hot tub for when Connie goes to fancy places. Those types of things, like there's always somebody that can, the concierge or whatever, kind of is there to help out. And that's why we thought it wasn't like a crazy requirement. I mean, maybe the answer was an hour, maybe it's 15 minutes, I don't know, but we kind of started with 30.
Yeah.
Again, we wouldn't say, it was 34 minutes and now that's strike one, $500
And you would
Yeah.
be down forever.
Okay, fair enough. I understand. Peter?
If I could return, because questions weren't asked of me when I was up here that, I'd love to be able to respond to. So, I think you're right, 3 days is too long, but it's not 3 days or 30 minutes. I mean, you could go to Jourdain's and be waiting for a sandwich for 30 minutes, so like my experience is, for example, like I'm the contact when Sarah's aunt goes to Airbnb, so she's 92, so rather than her, so she calls me and then I call the outfit. So she was in Florida a couple of weeks ago, the pillows were smelly, so I go, really? But yeah, the pillows are smelly, so I call the place, she's probably on the phone, I leave a message, she called me back, I'm on the phone, we got the pillow, she got new pillows that day. Did she respond within a half hour? No, but we were happy. 2 days later, the toilet breaks. The aunt calls me, I call the person, they don't pick up the phone, but within a couple of hours, they get back to me, then she calls somebody else who comes down a couple of hours later and fix the toilet. I think we want, I understand what you're saying, it's just, I don't think you just realize how short 30 minutes is. You go to Jourdain's and order a sandwich, you still wait 30 minutes.
And if you've got a flood in your bathroom, 30 minutes is a long time.
We call the plumber,
Well,
Yeah, but
you're renting.
but the
you're
guy
not
who just flew in from
calling the number.
California doesn't know the plumber's number. That's exactly what we want to have, the person. So I picture this, a huge pipe breaks, the fire department's called, the police are there, then we have to respond within 6 hours. And we now have a police officer that has to stay there, the firefighters stay there to keep, control of the residents while this is flooding, while it's, they're, to me, they have to be reasonable.
But the pipe could break on my house when I'm not renting it out, and, it's going to take longer than a half hour to find me, so it just, I don't know, it seems
So
like.
how long do you think it should be? I'm curious.
I think a few hours. I think like 2 hours or something like that. So even if I'm on a phone call for an hour, a conference call, and the second person gets called and it's something they feel they don't want to prove without talking to me, they're going to leave a message for me, and I'm not going to get back for an hour and a half anyway. It's just there's certain things that you can't interrupt.
But I think too, if that happened one time and you said, I was on a conference call, I'm sorry, it's not going to be like,
We're gonna-
sort of $500 fine if you vote. It's going to be, okay, as opposed to there's no contact. It's really to make sure that the person that's doing this knows that they have to have contacts that are reachable. If it's 15 minutes or it's an hour and 10 minutes, it doesn't really matter. I think 30 minutes is.
I've got one question about this, because of what you're saying, it makes sense, but how is this is for Mary Ann, how is the code actually written in terms of violations? Who's determined there's a violation that there has to be, we talked about this a little bit, So,
determine it's a violation of court.
okay, so now we have a situation where, someone's been on the phone for too long or whatever, for an hour long, business call, and then, blah, 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 so then, it takes a couple hours before it's dealt with, and, how is that reported first? Who's gonna say that it took too long, and then write the violation?
Depends. I mean, give me a more specific.
Okay, more specific example is, a neighbor who doesn't like this whole thing, feels like, they don't like that the renter parked too far away from the curb, and they call and nobody gets back to them within a half hour. They complain to you guys. The next time it happens, nobody gets back to them in a half hour.
That's not going to be, the parking too far from a curb, the police, if it's really a problem, they're just going to put a ticket on the car and that's it. It's not
It has
gonna
nothing
have-
to do
It has
with
nothing to do with
this.
Airbnb at that
It's
point.
nothing to
It's
do
just-
Also, there's a difference between responding and fixing.
That's what I just said, right, when I said
Sorry.
response,
So what I'm
was
trying
something
to
as
get back
opposed to
at, though,
solving
is-
it.
is,
Right,
let's say-
you're right, I'm supporting that idea, that you respond, you say, I'm on it, it's very immediate, I realize we have to do something right away, or it's something for a day, the smelly pillows.
You could just say that the owner has to respond promptly.
Right.
Problem is, what's promptly? No,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying.
Right.
What's promptly? That's why they say 30 minutes, and I think there's a recognition that, nobody's standing there with a stopwatch.
I still have a problem with the process, I'm sorry. I was trying to get to it, and then we got off on,
Pillows.
whatever, no, not the pillows, no, but let's take the I don't know if this is a good example, it may not play out, but, okay, so there's a pipe that's broken, and so, they're waiting for someone to respond. That sounds like it's a somewhat more serious situation, but, let's say they didn't respond until an hour and a half because of something, they were on the train commuting up or something, I don't know why, for some reason they didn't respond. So then, who's making the determination that's a violation at that point? I mean, the police that are, because it's a follow-through about.
I think, in that situation, it would be the police. The police or the fire called out. They say to Larry, they gave me the name of this, they weren't there, they gave me the name of this person, the person wasn't there, we had to wait an hour and a half or whatever. It would go to Larry, or maybe they complained to Ed, or, it would somehow come to you. And in that situation, from the police.
Well, you previously, you said in the court, so that's what I was.
No, you said the violation. What's a violation? I said, you said, what is a violation? It's a violation.
Well, I mean, a violation of, what, I'm not talking about the piece of paper now, I'm talking about actually someone said, you know what, that's a violation of the law itself. They should have been responded.
Then my answer is, in that situation, it would be whatever.
Would the police write a
DPW
ticket
person
at that
police
spot?
came out.
Would they write an appearance ticket, or would they just notify Ed or Larry that there was a problem, or?
Yeah, it depends, it actually depends who it is. My guess is because if it's DPW, they're not gonna write an appearance ticket. But most likely, it's gonna come to either the building department or the village administrator. Maybe Brenda.
Get your plumber out.
So the police won't write a ticket on the spot?
You know what?
They could, that's, yeah.
They could. But you said the police, but it might not be the police who's out there. They could. I mean,
But I don't think.
So there isn't any clear-cut problem. There
But
isn't
to me,
any
it's not,
clear-cut
the neighbor
problem.
calls and, because they don't like where they leave their garbage cans, and they say it takes an hour to hear back from them.
Well, it certainly can't be that, but I don't know that the way the code is written says that there's an exception for things like misparked cars skewed from the curb, or garbage cans in the wrong
Right.
place.
But all through the code, not every single, you say what the law is, and you say if you violate the law, and the violations could be little or they could be big.
It says material
That's the way laws are.
Right.
Right, that's if it
But I
comes to
don't-
you. But let's say it went to court. My guess is if it's the two strikes you're out, it goes to court. There's not gonna go to court if it's just like a little tiny thing, like if people were parking too far from the curb. It had been a problem, regularly. They kept blocking your driveway or something like that. It was a regular problem of that.
Well, at that point, the police would issue a ticket anyways, wouldn't they? And then the neighbor could complain to anyone in Village Hall, and effectively it could become a note about that particular permit holder not providing proper information.
Right.
But I mean, all right, so I've just never been comfortable with the 30-minute window. As you know from the very beginning, I've not been comfortable with that.
So,
Because the complaint can be from anybody, it doesn't say who the complaint's from.
just, in terms of practical, real-world people who do this, in my experience, being a consumer of Airbnb, that texting and communicating is almost instantaneous. You have a problem, you text it, somebody texts you back, there's a lot of information in the place that you're renting, and if there's been a response, like Janice and I both said, you responded, there was an evaluation, and you evaluated it as something that could be put off, but
or that would take longer than a half an hour to solve,
right,
but you
yes.
responded.
Right. So, I think, again, as Janice pointed out, a lot of the way we're looking at this is the balance with people who are quite fearful that the owners won't pay attention to potential problems. And this is a way of making sure that owners are on notice that they should, be ready, take care of it. So, if it becomes a problem and we hear all these people who say, I couldn't respond that fast, maybe we say it's 45 minutes, maybe we say it's an hour. But I see it as a positive to make this idea move forward at all. So I wouldn't be in favor of changing it at the moment. All these pieces, I think we've said along the way. If 50 is not the right number, maybe that does change. Maybe it doesn't. But we have to start somewhere.
Right, and if a number of situations come to our attention where the 30 minutes is the issue and it's clearly not
then we
workable,
can look at that.
But this again is an attempt to balance the needs of those who want to rent with those who are not interested in having rentals on their block. And, certainly our job is not to protect the person who is renting out their house. Our job is to protect the community as a whole.
While also looking to allow people to rent out their house.
Yeah.
Well, under certain conditions.
Yes. Well, please, go on.
Can I have the mic right here, maybe?
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. First of all, just in response, I'm sorry, I want to thank the board because they are amazing to me, the time and effort that they put in, and they have great brains. They think out of the box. I'm very impressed. I think something that's being missed here, which I just came up with now, is that the people who want to rent aren't realizing that this is a business. There's a responsibility to not only what's around you, but to the people that you're renting to. Most businesses, including the few, I've been in Airbnb only a couple of times, there was always someone on call within a few miles of the premises, not necessarily the owner. He hired a manager who was on call for anything like this. And I think that we are remiss in Irvington to not zone in more. I'm really concerned about what you're doing here, to be very honest. I'm concerned about the one-night stands, the transientness of that, the parking situation, which is already a problem. I had thought originally they had said whoever rents has to have parking on their premises or their parking spot. I don't see it in here. I may have missed it. That was mentioned at one time. So that you didn't have a family come with 2 cars and now they're parking on the streets that have no parking spaces for the people who live there, or the people who might live elsewhere and want to go into the city. Either way. I think it's a totally different responsibility. You know, you're arguing about this 30-minute thing. It's a different responsibility. If you're renting your house, it is a business, and you have to have a different mental headset, in my opinion. I don't think that the people who are thinking of doing it realize that yet, including the business people. So, I mentioned the one-night stands. That really bothers me, and anyone I've spoken to on the street. I guess I should get a paper and get signatures. That one-night stand is scary. Irvington is a little community where we all feel fairly safe, and our children walk to and fro on their own for the most part. If you're having 180 times 50 one-nighters, which could happen, unlikely, but it could happen, that's a lot of transient people here. I don't know why we're even doing this in Irvington, to be honest. I don't think it fits our community. I would be one who would benefit from that. I'm a senior. I have less income than I've ever had. But I don't think I will do it. Not the way it's being set up. There's not enough surveillance. You don't know who's coming in. Our town doesn't know who they're renting to. When you go to a hotel, people register, and there's a backup to it. And I think Airbnbs, there's a registry also. We had to register at a conference center before we could get to the Airbnb. I don't know if they're all like that, but some are. So, the parking availability, is that something that the owner of the house has to give up their spot for that person if they don't have a place for them on their driveway? It was mentioned at one time. Is that something that was overlooked, or can it be reconsidered if it was? Number 2, mentions a sign, doesn't mention the size of a sign. If you have a street, a lot of the side streets here could have 6 or 8 people renting. You're gonna have 6 or 8 signs saying
Let me just explain
Airbnb?
that. No, it says a sign, it's allowed, and the only sign you can have is your address. It can't say.
Oh, okay.
It can't say Leola's B&B.
Okay, I misunderstood that.
Yeah, no, because it refers to the sign section. I think I explained that in an earlier.
Okay. The responding in 30 minutes goes along with Airbnbs, and if we're doing something similar, I understand it doesn't seem like a long time if you're in a tunnel. My phone doesn't work when you're headed into Grand Central. You know, the last part. But your responsibility is to have someone on call besides yourself. In that situation, they have a backup person. You're running a business. You have to remember that. It's also a responsibility of the people that you're renting to. You know, you talked about floods. I had one recently. Not fun, and within 20 minutes, you're in trouble. What about if your power goes out and you have no air conditioning and it's 95 degrees out? I have that happen every other July 4th, it seems, and you can't even get anyone to help you. But if you're renting to someone, you have to have backup. And I don't think that everyone realizes this. I'm also concerned about insurance. I can't imagine that anyone can just rent out on a regular basis without some kind of renter's insurance of some sort. And I think that needs to be addressed. Also, taxes to the state. Is that involved?
Well, no, right now it wouldn't. The state law probably doesn't allow it at the moment, unless hotel is redefined. Hopefully it will be at some point.
I don't want any surprises for the people doing it, that's all. I'm not looking to get it. I'm just saying if it's there, someone who's renting should be aware of it because it's part of their cost. Security, enforcement, big issues. And I really wish you would go back and look again at the one-nighter. That's the worst to me. If you get someone for a few nights, maybe it's someone vacationing. One-nighter could be a whole different thing. And I don't think people come to Irvington to go to our restaurants. If they come here, they come to go to the Phillipsburg Manor, Kykwit. You're not going to raise the business that much. They'll buy a cup of coffee or a sandwich occasionally. If you ever seen a biker, I've seen them in our town. You know what they come in and they buy anytime I've been there? A cup of coffee. Because they're biking, they're riding, they're on to see something else. So I don't think that should be a major, I don't think it would be a major impact. I wish it would be. I really wish it would be. So anyway, please, go back and reconsider the one-nighter, the security, and making people aware of their responsibility if they do this.
I think the one thing I will say is I think a lot of people have been doing this, you know, and it's just, so far there's been no regulation at all, so, I know I want.
13 versus 50 times 180 days.
Well, we don't know how
That's a
many
lot
days
more.
people have been doing it. Some of them we know they had multiple, probably more than 180 days, and we don't know how many, if there are 13 or more, because that was just on some of the websites that we looked at, so. And there are, you can't just say it has to be Airbnb, you know, there's a whole bunch of competing sites as well. So I think that when we decided as a board to tackle this, one of the things we said was, we're having a really hard time regulating it now under the current code, even though it's not allowed under the current code. So that's why we've kind of proactively tried to do this. One, to allow people that want to do it to have a way that they can legally do it. And two, for the people that have been doing it and haven't necessarily been the best actors, it gives us a much easier way to stop it, I think is the way I'd sum that up. So
Is it illegal now?
it is, it's not, you can't do it, it's illegal as of the, our current zoning code, correct?
And have any of these people been approached and told it's illegal or gotten a fine?
Yes.
I don't mean the big things, I mean the little people on our little house.
We have not gone after the little houses because we are working on this, so it's kind of more the spirit of the law. It's almost like now how Westchester County doesn't enforce the marijuana laws because they're anticipating the legalization of it. So our building inspector has not gone out looking for these because, you know, we kind of said we've been working on this.
But once the law is passed, assuming it is passed, then.
I know, but
I don't know the protocol.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's so important. So, once the law is passed, if it is discovered that people are continuing to rent without the proper inspections or registration, then there will be consequences.
Yes.
There's a 45, sort of a 45-day window that you have to register by from when the law is passed. If you don't register after 45 days, then.
And we know, the building inspector has gotten up to speed on all the kind of
Safety.
The laws and things that you have to follow. So he's ready to go
Right.
once this passes.
So
I think if it doesn't pass, he's ready to go either way. But-
Right, because I think those are a big concern, the fire safety and all.
Absolutely. And that's to me the thing that makes me most concerned is, you know, knowing that these are going on and our inability to be able to effectively stop them. That we would like, and I do believe that most people, I think we talked about this as a board, most people do like to try to follow the law. But right now, I think some people are under the impression that they can do it. Some people didn't think about it. Some people just assume they can do it because you can go to a website and sign up and it's
Right.
pretty easy and you feel like it's legitimate because it's on a website. You know, so I think that, you know, for all the reasons we discussed, that's why I want to try to tackle this. But safety to me is the biggest benefit of all this. Secondarily is probably letting people make some money and stay in their homes.
Right, of course, yes, okay.
But at the same time, we don't want neighborhoods to change because of this, which is why we also want to.
It's a balancing
someone
act.
goes for it.
Yes.
On the issue of parking, there are a lot of varieties of situations of homes, and I think what we said about parking is the explanation that the homeowner has to leave as a message is what are the parking rules, and to be sure that anybody who's there on a short-term rental obeys those parking rules. If they break them and get a ticket, they get a ticket. If they there happens to be a kind of home that has off-street parking, well, then there's parking there. But, the person who has a home on Cottonette doesn't own that spot in front, it's not their spot. So, they would follow the rules as anybody else would who was visiting or living there. And some people take the train.
And we also felt too that it's somewhat self-policing in the fact that if you don't have adequate parking, you're not going to get well rated
Right,
and
and-
all those types of things. No one's going to want that.
Somebody says, I don't want to ever come back here, you shouldn't come here because there's no place to park. Okay.
Anyone else?
Ellen, I know the answers to a lot of your questions.
Okay, good.
But I don't know that we don't have all night, so I would be very happy to talk to you outside it. A couple of quick ones, though, in terms of the concern about the one-night stand piece. Remember that in drafting this, there's a lot of good stuff you have in here. This makes great sense. We don't want to mess up our community. We want to enhance it. And Airbnb can be a great enhancement to that. In terms of the stability, the worry about comings and goings, it actually enables a person to stay in their home because they need to supplement the income. You're retired, that sort of thing, whatever circumstances. And so I create some stability, although the perception might be too disruptive with a lot of comings and goings. The one-nighters, remember that in this draft here, again, a lot of good things in here. It says a person has to be the primary resident. So a person who's primary resident, from a practical matter, you're not going to have 181 night stands in your home. You're just not. And some cool one night things is the Eileen Fisher Institute. It's very terrific that we could host people here in our community rather than them having to go to a hotel, and that those types of guests, come around for sure. So, and then parking-wise, and to your point, Connie, that many take the train, I would say about 25 to 30% do, so there's no car to contend with at all. And in terms of it being a business, so, and sort of profit, you had mentioned, Janice, this is unfortunately or unfortunately not the sort of thing that you can replace your income with. It's a true supplement type of thing. And yes, it should be treated seriously because it is a big responsibility. And by nature of what it is, it already is. But in terms of the concern about many people, 50 people doing 180 days, it varies so very much. Some people don't ever leave their home when they have a guest, others vacate. And so some people rent for 1 week when they're on vacation once a year, or they might do it event only, maybe during Halloween or something. So from a practical matter, I think it's quite fine that you're starting with 50 to have the ability to register, because they may rent 2 nights a year, that sort of thing. And okay. And so, again, a lot more information I'd be happy to fill you in on, Ellen, because your concerns are very normal and the kind of reaction a lot of people have. But Airbnb has 10 years of sort of, it's showing that this stuff kind of works. It's incredible, actually. So, okay, back to my questions. I spoke with Ed, and he mentioned that he was going to provide information about the health, fire, and safety standards on the New York. Is that available? Oh, terrific. Okay.
I knew I'd see you tonight, so.
Okay, thanks. And I'm glad to hear that we may have more time for public comment, because I was having a really hard time understanding what all of this stuff really even means. And the definition of family members, can you speak to that?
Yeah, a family's defined in the code. You know what, I'm not sure I brought it with me. But if you go to the beginning of the zoning code and the definitions family, and what a family is I think it's up to 3 people unrelated, or if it's more than 3 people, they either have to be blood related or the functional equivalent of a family. And it describes in the code, the code was the functional equivalent if you eat together.
Okay, up to 3 unrelated. Many many combinations,
Yeah,
it's
I
kind of
know.
strange.
Originally,
Yeah, okay.
when I first explained the law, I did have the definition of family with me, so people would understand, yeah, that if you've got, two friends coming and they're not related, that would fit the code's definition of family.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good, okay. So, all right, great. Fire and safety, I wanted some clarification around what all of that means. Okay. And I don't want to exceed my 3 minutes.
I'll talk while you figure it out. I think on the health and safety, I think that's where we asked Ed and Mary Ann to kind of look into that and find out what it actually entails. And I think Ed actually did a lot of research, and I think you did as well, talking to everyone all the way up to the state level to make sure we understood exactly what it entailed. So.
Yeah, and while what the state is doing now is imposing the requirements for bed and breakfast, mainly because any other use, any other use is more restrictive. The bed and breakfast, and essentially what it provides is that you have to have one of three things: either a sprinkler system, and I don't know the sprinkler system in the whole house, but a sprinkler system, or a second means of egress from the bedroom, and that's defined in a certain kind of stairway. But that's in there. They're frankly not easy requirements, but.
Yeah, Brian, you alluded to that too. And so essentially, it sounds like with these requirements, you'll make hardly anybody be able to afford to do it. And so do you just want this to be for the wealthy when it's really the people who need it? Low-income people need it more?
Yeah, I mean, the way that this is the way the state has figured this out, and I think it's to kind of prevent people renting third floors. I think what you can do is you can rent only, say, certain rooms, perhaps. Like on the first floor where there's a back door, things like that, but maybe you can't rent out the second floor. Like there's things I think you can look at that make it more feasible. But if
there's a ladder,
the ladders you can throw out.
You can have a ladder, but it's got to be fixed. It's got to be out a certain number of inches from the house. Essentially, what are fire escapes?
So you just have to read it carefully and maybe talk to Ed, or just to really get exactly what applies to every circumstance.
We weren't. I think we were a little dumbfounded by it first, and we went as far as I forget the woman's name, was like the state building inspector.
I actually went higher than that. I went to the deputy head of codes in the state, and that's what the law is. And the village can't pass a law that says that you don't have to comply with the state building code. So once it's allowed, once it's a use, it's got to be inspected, and it has to comply with the state code. It may be that,
we could have been more onerous, but that's all we could do.
Right.
We can't be
And
less onerous.
maybe that the state modifies the requirements for these at some point, but it's not in the works now. I had heard that they might, but I spoke with the person who's in charge of code revisions, and it's not in the works now. But like Ryan said, the best thing is to talk to Ed about the configuration of your house and see if it does comply, or like Ryan said, maybe you use rent out different rooms.
Yeah, like the back room on the first floor is fine, but the one on the second floor that's all the way down the hall is not. Like, I'm just making this up. I don't even know what your house looks like, but those types of things. I think that I think it's difficult, but I think there's a reason for it. It's not just kind of laws for the sake of laws. I think it's really to protect life safety, and I think there's a view that if you're there temporarily, when you think about like a hotel, they have the little map on the back of your door and all those types of things. It's similar to that, where you're disoriented, you don't know it well, the lights are out, and all of a sudden you smell smoke. Like, you got to be able to get out of there. And I think that's again one of the, other than enabling people to do it legally, that's to me the biggest motivation for doing this, is to prevent some kind of tragedy of someone renting out 9 bedrooms upstairs, and half of them are converted dormers, or I don't know, making things up. But it's I think this is a good part of the law that I'm actually fairly happy with.
So-
I understand your point.
Yeah, okay, and then just the point about, again, this sort of business, this is a little bit of a quasi-business, because an Airbnb or a hotel is a business that whoever reserves, they have to take it, whereas the Airbnb, you're being very careful because it's your home and you have a dialogue in advance. So the person has either a profile, they've been reviewed before, or there's an extensive dialogue. So it's really very different than a B&B, which is truly a business. And so the Airbnb is a home sharing and it's a supplement to your income. Absolutely, it should be safe and all these things. They're all very good. But it's you got to look at it a little bit differently than a full-blown business that you have to accept anyone coming in from the public. It's not what that is. The homeowner cares about their home, their community, their neighbors. They vet who's coming and going.
We don't, we're assuming that that's the case.
We're assuming 99 out of 100 too,
Right.
but we know one that didn't.
Right.
So-
No choice about
Yeah.
how it's regulated by the state.
In order to do it,
We
you
can't say you don't need a second means of egress, you can't. So that it's being treated as another kind of B&B is a state requirement, not ours.
And part of our purpose here for doing this at all is to enable people to have a legitimate income supplement, to enable them to stay in their homes. That's always been part of the purpose here. It's not to penalize people who want to do Airbnbs, but to craft reasonable regulations that protects you and other people in the community, so that you can legitimately raise some additional income to help you stay here, and the people who stay here hopefully will have a wonderful time, but the people on your block are also protected.
Yeah, and Janice, that's a really important point. I don't know if you were on the board, but a few years ago, there was want to rent out a room in her house via Airbnb, and came to this board and asked, is it legal? And it wasn't, and so
Said
she
so.
didn't- What?
And we said so.
We told her, and she didn't do it. So, so this would legalize what she wants to do, assuming she meets the requirements.
The one boarder in one room, does
I don't
that
know.
have the same?
No, that wasn't her
Yeah.
situation.
There is certainly the border
That's
is still on the books. That's,
Yeah.
so one room in your house to a border, but I'm talking to your point that somehow we're not appreciating the people who want to do Airbnbs. We're trying to appreciate your needs and also the needs of the other people who live on your block.
Okay.
I concur, yeah.
Okay.
All right, I think I'm probably out of time, but I will look more closely at this stuff. Thank you.
Talk to Ed, that would be the smartest
Yeah, I
thing.
did.
And now you've got the paper that Larry just gave you, so that
Okay.
should help.
Thanks.
Okay.
So if there's no more public comment tonight, we will keep this open. And we will move on to authorization to approve credit change order. Number one for the fire department roof replacement project, 2017.
Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.
Stay.
Yeah, Debbie,
Mary,
how's
there's
it?
just stuff coming. There's just stuff coming.
What?
Wait, Larry's leaving.
All right, Larry will be back.
Larry said continue.
He said continue. He didn't say.
This is an easy one if you'd like.
Larry said he came only for the Airbnb. He's now picking and choosing his issues.
Okay.
Here we can go.
Okay,
So,
Art.
this credit change order is very simple. We built in a $25,000 contingency or line item into the contract for the roof replacement, and none of it was used. So technically speaking, we're doing a change order to eliminate that $25,000 from the total contract that you approved.
Oh, good.
So it's bringing it down from $179,000 down to $154,000, so that's a good thing.
Happy days are here again.
Yeah, the contract's closed, the project's done. This is really just record keeping,
Okay.
frankly.
I can't imagine there's any questions.
No.
Resolved to approve.
Give them the money. Give them the money.
Resolved to approve credit change order number 1 in contract 2017-17 with Armored Tight Construction Corporation for the Irvington Fire Department roof replacement project in the amount of $25,000 and authorize the administrator to execute said change order. I'll make a motion if I get a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. The next is the Volunteer Fire Department Service Award listing.
Nope, one before that.
Oh, sorry.
Sir Sherry.
Authorizing tax Sir Sherry sentiments, Sherry Hill Manor, and Castle One Realty. I do. We're stuck. Boom. Okay. Were these expected or unexpected, or?
Participated, there were, yes. Counsel on this is Ed Lammers, and he definitely brought it to our attention that he was close to a settlement, or they want to negotiate at this point. And it is anticipated.
Then I'll continue with my reading. I wrote down flags here. Whereas petitions having been filed by Strawberry Hill Manor and Castle One Realty, Huron petitioners, challenging real property tax assessments on the town of Greenberg's assessment roll with respect to the subject property for the 2016 and 17 assessment years, Castle One Realty section, etc. 2016 and 17 years, Strawberry Hill Manor. The 2016, whereas petitioners' actions are now pending in the Supreme Court, Westchester County. Whereas the town and the petitioner have reached a mutually agreeable resolution. Now therefore, the Office of the Village Attorney is authorized to effectuate a settlement commensurate with the following terms. Original assessments reduced. The Village of Irvington's share of the refund is $21,827.74. I'll make a motion if I can get a second. Second. All in favor? Aye. I think Larry's going to be very happy with this. Next is the service listing for volunteers of the Irvington Fire Department for the length of service award plan. So I usually go through and figure out how many people made it, but I didn't actually do that this year, but there were a lot.
A lot.
50, right? 50 is the
50
number?
points, yeah. Well, notice I did have 1 point.
Oh, what did you do? You went to a meeting?
I went to the annual meeting.
Oh.
Didn't quite get the retirement this year. So resolved to approve the 2018 service listing for volunteers of the Irvington Fire Department to be used in the length of service award plan. I'll make a motion if I have a second.
Second.
All in favor? So I'm not approving myself. Authorization to approve change order number 1R and construction change directive number 1 and number 2 for the Irvington Fire Department interior renovation project 2018-24.
We sold you down the river.
I'll abstain.
All right, so easy come, easy go, I guess. So this is the interior project at the Irvington Firehouse. There are 3 changes here. 2 of them are unanticipated expenses for which we have a contingency for, and 1 of them is a credit coming back in our direction. So change order numbered 1R involves a wall and partition construction. I can't tell you the details, frankly. I'm not sure you want me to. But our architect has authorized and recommended a change of $8,959.21. Again, this doesn't change the total value of the contract because we do have a contingency of, I believe, $25,000 again, maybe $20,000 or $25,000 built in to the contract. The second is flooring that this particular contractor will not be doing. We're eliminating it from their contract. We are going to turn around and use a different contractor with a different material. Again, that hasn't been worked out yet, but we're at least removing this amount from the existing contractor's contract. And that's and that number changed earlier today. It was originally in your agenda 8,328. It's now 10,000 even. So we'll modify the resolution for that. And the final item is change directive. It's a little slightly different term. Change directive number 2 involving replacement of countertops, something that was in dispute and not in the contract. $5,434.58. Again, reducing the contingency that's in the contract currently.
Questions, or should I read?
I mean, I kind of read practically the whole thing, so if you just modify the 10,000 as outlined, if you just modify that one
Is
item
there a
for
reason why
10,000.
you're taking the floor away from the contractor and giving it to someone else?
I don't know the nuts and bolts of there's a bit of a dispute over that item. So the contractor's not interested in we wanted to make a change. Contractor's not interested in changing anything, so we're simply taking it from them and using a different contractor. It's the way this project's been going. It's not bad, but it's just the way it's been going. The contractor doesn't want to vary from the original plans.
So I will make the motion to approve it as Larry read, and we amended to 10,000 from 8328. If I get a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Start raising your hand.
Close enough. Review of tentative budget. So I estimated we finished this item by 9:20, so I think we're ahead of schedule.
Wow.
Actually at 8:50 was my guess for being done with 14, so pretty much on the money.
All right.
Don't pat yourself on the back here.
Yeah, seriously.
Everyone has their books. We're going to be discussing pages in the front of the book. Now that you've had the opportunity to hear all the departmental requests, we've put them into the budget. As you're aware, the tentative budget should be filed by the 20th of this month, or this week. So what we've done is we put a recommended budget together. So it's for basically your review and you see if there's any changes that you'd like to be made at this time. Larry and I did meet with the police department. Larry can chime in at any time.
Yeah.
And anything.
Yeah, so, well, I was waiting till you get to the breakout of the expenditures, but basically, what was done, what was done in the time that you heard from each of the departments until now is that we heard we got some feedback from some members of the board about the request to create a second lieutenant's position. That was as part of the police department's budget. So we concurred with the concern about that and removed that particular request from the tentative budget. Frankly, we would have been over the tax cap, to be perfectly honest, and so we will have to address that at some point down the road as we get closer to the retirement of the chief and changeover in the department. So we'll have to deal with that. But a full year of a lieutenant's position is not something we were recommending at this time. There were a few other items in the police department. There was an equipment request that included a license plate reader being installed in another of the patrol vehicles for another $20,000, which we internally rejected. We feel that they have enough of the license plate readers that they need as far as on the road. And there was a minor adjustment to training. It was really,
$4,000.
Yeah, it was a $4,000 adjustment to training. So those items were changed, and basically what you see, unless there's any other minor things, but basically what you have in front of you reflects the department requests that you heard, with the exception of those that I just mentioned.
So giving that, I have a recap of where we are on the budget. We'll look at the first page first. Expenditures are up a total of $644,911. It's approximately 3.62% of an increase over last year's adopted budget. Our revenues are up $126,000, or less than 1%, 0.71%.
That's revenues other than property taxes.
Right.
Non-property tax revenue.
Film permits and
Just to be
such.
clear. Yes.
Larry and I went over what we thought was sustainable revenues, basically. I say one of the biggest ones I'm very happy to report is our interest and income that we're yielding at the bank. We found some better yields and we've had some extra fund balance to invest. So we've increased that from $15,000 to $90,000 for next year. That's an increase of about $75,000. So it's very welcome at this time to have an increase. Other ones were pretty modest here and there. We adjusted them accordingly, where perhaps, things are not sustainable, we reduced them, but the net result is 126,000 in additional revenues next year. But that comes, so once you net out the expenses versus the expenditures and the revenues, they net out, and the difference is made up by the tax levy. So this here budget that we're looking at now would increase the levy by $538,911, and that would be an increase of 3.76%. We were very fortunate last year in that our tax, our assessables, the assessed values went up considerably last year. They went up by over $67 million. It's about a 3.68% increase. So our levy, our assessables went up 3.68. You can see our tax, the actual levy itself also went up. And it's interesting that, of course, then when the assessed values go up, it has an impact on the tax rate. So the tax rate is the increase is very low. It's a 0.08% tax increase.
Spread out over more.
Because it's spread out over a higher assessed value. So a lot of different moving parts, but that's what it comes down to. So the tax rate is up minimally, but residents will still feel a tax increase if indeed their assessed values went up.
Just a point of clarification, we don't do the assessed values, right?
Correct. Greenberg.
Right, I just want to make sure that that's perfectly clear.
Part of the increase in assessed values is partially because of the phase-in that went now since last year. Right. And after this year, there's no more phase-in. So those residents will feel the increase. And now that we're at 100% evaluation, the assessor in Greenberg does it isn't a go out and check each house, but it's a statistical increase over houses based on data.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that.
We do not, we have no control over that.
Does Brenda, this proposed sales tax for the county that would be in the non-cities that haven't, that plan was going to be, what, 1% if it passes? Is that figured in here anywhere, or you just don't know?
No, it's not figured in.
Okay.
Because it hasn't been passed.
Right.
There's a lot of steps.
Well,
That's what I figured.
We talked about that, yeah.
Yeah, and even if it were to pass, let's say before the end of the session in June,
Yeah.
you wouldn't see any revenue flowing until probably the first of the year, which is 7/12 of the way through our fiscal year, so.
I thought they said
it's-
maybe October or something, but.
Okay, and
Yeah.
if it happens, then, but I wouldn't feel comfortable budgeting for
That's what I
something that
thought. Yeah, that's
is.
wise.
Flip a coin.
But it could happen.
Could happen.
Yeah, I mean, it may
It could
take,
be next year's big increase.
That would be,
It would be huge
right.
for us.
it would be huge.
But one thing that is taken out of here, not that it's as big
You
a
mentioned
item
the
as that, is the per capita state aid. The entire amount, which is 35,000, has been removed.
$35,000, right.
And again, that's being done out of an abundance of caution, based upon the governor's budget, but we'll know in April, in all likelihood, if the state passes their budget on time, we'll know in April whether that's in or out, and we can make a change. And this is a tentative budget, that's why we call it that, so you can make a change in time for the adopted budget if needed.
Okay.
But it's out right now.
So, all right, so the next page is what the tax rate summary would look like. This is a document, I'm sorry. The tax rate summary you're familiar with, you've seen this, is always in the budget document. And it summarizes, and you have the column on the far right for the tentative budget as the expenditures. This is in hundreds of thousands per mill, so it is. So it's, you see our expenditures at $18,472,000,000. Our revenues, appropriated fund balance, we left the same. It's $175,000 that we will be appropriating from our surplus, which has been healthy. We see a good year ending for us as well. And then yielding a tax levy of 14,863,000. So of course, it's 3 more places after that. And then you have your assessed valuation and then the tax rate. So tax rate at this point would be 7.8233 per thousand, and it gives then the percent increase, 0.08. So that's that. The tax cap is on the next page. On the far right, I have a column that's called available. That's the total amount that's available to be used towards the tax cap this year. Of that, 223,000 is rollover from prior years. They don't let you roll over everything, it's a calculation. But given this rollover and the total availability, and the projected levy of the 14,862,800, it would leave us a balance. So it's still coming in under the total allowance. We'll be under the cap by 172,625. Then what we did here on the next page here, basically it's a 1-page showing what comprises that total expenditure, that increase of expenditures of 664,000. And basically I broke it out by how much would be really a fixed cost and what could be potentially discretionary, or those departmental requests that you listen to from the board, from the department heads. So salaries you have there from CSEA, non-union increases, police salaries, then you have your benefits of retirement. A little note for the public, that is down by $92,000. Remarkably, it's a function of the rate. It's the actual contribution.
Which does seem nearsighted to me that they.
I know, right?
At least just keep it flat, but anyway. I know it's not us, they just give us that number, but.
Yeah, and it's a rolling calculation. It's an average of the pension requirements. So it doesn't fluctuate year to year just with a change in stock market value or something like that with the state retirement plans.
You know, I think it's just always funny when you hear about how unfunded they really are, and then the year to year it's, under, but.
Well, New York State's not terribly underfunded.
No, but
the other states, yes.
And healthcare is, so maybe put that.
Well, that's a different story.
Maybe put $92,000 in health, not our $92,000.
Someone else's 92.
Yeah, but anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
We have Social Security, workers' comp. I don't have a firm number from workers' comp, but they're anticipating, I think it was a 4% increase for total insurance. Let's hope that stands. So far, we have been happy with the new workers' comp company that we contracted with last year. We had tremendous savings by changing companies, and they've been responsive. So far, so good there. Insurance as well, about a $15,000 increase. That's based on a 4% increase over the current premiums. So you have there a subtotal of fixed costs of about $420,000. Next is your departmental requests. If you recall, during the DPW presentation, there was a recommendation to have recurring paving each year of $30,000. And it'd be really, then you wouldn't have to bond for it. It wouldn't be in the capital budget, it would be in the operating budget. The other DPW requests were actually a savings. It has to do with our network IT issues. It does fall under DPW, even though it's not a transportation item. We have the recreation and parks request. Library has an increase of $37,000. Now, some of that was largely also debt service and benefits in there. So that's part of the, right. That's not represented because it wasn't part of the general fund, but a lot of it is benefits and salary. Then we have a theater, the increase to have our manager, the theater manager, at a full-time basis. Then we have the individual theater requests and a miscellaneous, just some adjustments along the way. And now a contingency, total contingency is down because we were budgeting in the past for the contract for the police department. But regardless of that, which is now part of the, police budget, there are 2 items in there that were not in there last year, and they're itemized here. So one would be a park enforcement officer. So where we took out the additional hiring of an additional parking enforcement person, it would be perhaps to rearrange the current schedules and add some additional hours.
Yeah, the request, as you may recall, was to have a second person hired, which was, another full part-time salary to add to the budget.
I like a full part-time.
Another permanent part-timer. We feel that we backed off of that request, put in 10 into contingency, with the strong belief that we'll be investing in some equipment that will allow it to happen more efficiently. So from a long-term standpoint, it didn't make sense to put in a brand-new permanent part-time employee doing that work, which then would be eliminated in the future. So we're kind of hedging our bets there a little bit. And the DPW request will be a request that we've been asked to include in the budget from DPW relating to their part-time employees and the salary that they're paid, the hourly rate that they're paid. You've not entertained that yet because we won't entertain that until before June, but we put a little placeholder in here as an olive branch to at least allow that to be considered.
So in terms of the one that thing that came up today with the public, the letter about more crosswalk time, where does that show up? Whose budget is that under?
It's the.
I know it's not here yet, but.
Yes, it's the police department. Or,
So they have, within the police department budget, there is a line for the crossing guards.
Yeah, yeah, and that was increased, a couple of years ago, that was increased to allow for the crossing at the high school, which was never even done, and then down here.
Yeah.
So now the request obviously is to increase that, but, it has to be looked at. We haven't analyzed it at all.
Yeah, do you think we have something together before the budget is approved?
I don't see why not, yeah.
So we at least.
Seems like it's a body more than the dollar.
Yeah, the logistics are more difficult than the dollars.
You almost need like,
Well, the thing is you can't.
cover here until that person's done, I don't know.
Right, I mean, you're talking about really, 30 minutes, 5 days a week, and that's hard to get someone to pick up on.
Yeah.
So you have.
Being a police officer covering.
Right, that's what I mean. I'll explore some of those things
They
before.
could assign somebody, even a traffic officer, or who knows, they could work it out.
To fill the gap, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is, I was going to ask you, and I just want to be clear about this. A lot of the parks programs showed, a cost, like the youth program, but then but that's showing nothing about how it's going to be subscribed to. So the subscription offsets that. So there was about, if I remember correctly, because I think this is.
About $42,000.
Yeah, 42,000.
Well, actually, if you add it up, I
45.
think it's 30, 11, and 13, so it's like $54,000 of youth camp personnel, youth baseball. Was that?
The total rec budget, I thought, was 42.
I think from a revenue, so,
No, when I'm looking at the ones that he had marked as partially offset by revenue.
right, but it's partial, so not all of those numbers add up to what showed up on the revenue side. I think what showed up was actually 41,000 on the revenue side. See down below on that schedule there?
Gotcha.
We just.
Oh, that was already subtracted out. Huh?
Well, it was not for the schedule that we just reviewed. The schedule we just reviewed was the gross expenses, because I think we wanted to explain to you why the expenses were going up 3+%.
So this number, the 41, is not reflected in the summary then?
In what we just went through, but it is reflected in the overall numbers. As Brenda mentioned in the beginning, revenues are up 126,000 on that very front page.
Yeah.
That includes the revenue from the recreation budget. But for analysis purposes, to get down to, to explain why your expenses are going up 3.62%, which is a valid point for your constituents, wanting to know why it's up that much when inflation is probably running in the low twos or upper ones. I think it's probably more like low twos. We went through and broke that out, and that Brenda just went through, just from a raw expense standpoint. But recognizing that if you look at this analysis and you say, well, obviously, the largest discretionary item, the largest departmental request that stands out is the Recreation and Parks Department. But if you drill down, 41,000 of that is offset by revenue. So if you cut back in certain areas, it could impact the revenues. But
I understand there's an analysis, but I'm just, so the long and short of it is the potential of 41,000 revenue is reflected in these numbers.
Correct.
in the tax numbers, that's right, in the levy numbers.
Any other questions of this? Do we have time to, tweak things a little if we want, look at things some more? I know I have a couple things I want to talk about with some department heads, but, I think overall we're in pretty good shape.
So once we finish with the tentative, then there's a time between the tentative and the adopted, and that's the time that we can have the whole analysis and review and see if there are things that people in the public wants to change or we want to change.
We released the tentative budget on Wednesday.
Right, yeah, so from a procedure standpoint, the tentative budget needs to be released by the 20th. We're basically ready to go here unless you have some major thing to trip us up. But we're ready to go. From the point when the tentative budget is released to the point when the budget hearing opens, which will be April 1st, there's no changes to that budget, which is perfectly fine because you don't have any meetings anyway, so that's good.
April 1st.
So April 1st, the budget hearing will open. You'll get comments, you'll either keep the hearing open or you'll be satisfied with what you've heard, and eventually you'll close it by the 20th of April, which hopefully will be earlier than that, and then you'll adopt the budget by May 1st. So
Larry, even though we're doing an admirable job of staying under the cap, our residents can't expect any check back from New York State any longer for us staying under the cap.
That's over.
I think that's over, yeah.
Rebates have extended, whatever we call sunsetted, I guess.
Yeah, it was a limited window, and I think last year was the last.
You mean the rebates we got from the state that came directly, like the STAR things?
No,
Not the STAR.
Not STAR.
I don't know what they called
it.
it.
It was like a bonus.
Yeah,
It was a surplus bonus.
yeah.
The other
I
one.
know some of them
Based on
came really
schools
late.
staying within
Yeah, right by the election.
Oh, if you stayed within the tax cap in your area, you got
Efficiency
this
plans,
thing. Yes,
You
right.
complied, and that sunset as far as any more rebates checks on
Right.
that. We're getting one, I think, still on the school.
Yeah, I lost track of the timing of that because
It's no
they
work.
shifted things around.
So,
But we've complied with everything along the way, not just staying within the cap, but there are also other requirements, as Brenda mentioned, about creating an efficiency plan, which we did with our sister villages, and then the most recent efficiency plan, the last two actually, were done through the county, right? So, so we were compliant with all of those.
So if there were bonuses to be had, we had them.
We had them, yes.
And if they're ended, they're ended for everybody.
they're already spent.
Right.
Correct.
But the STAR thing is different, and I think a lot of people get that check at some point.
That's been a while, that's been going on for a while, though.
Yeah.
That's not, yeah, and it wasn't tied to the tax cap, I don't think.
Does it come in as a check or
No,
is it
it's
a
a
deduction?
deduction, yeah.
Was it a deduction?
It's a,
Oh, that's a deduction. The other things were the checks. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the FPA is broke, and we're sending out bonus checks, but again, I digress, Larry.
Is that soapbox again?
Yeah. Everyone needed a $300 check.
Okay, let's
Anyway.
move on.
Okay, so I'll go ahead then and do the tentative budget based on what we have here.
We're still 6 minutes ahead of where I thought.
okay, well, let's hurry.
Review of a plan
Under the time.
for ADA accessible sidewalk
Yes.
curbs on Main Street.
Okay, that was Larry's handout.
All right, so, yeah, I just wanted to circle back at the meeting tonight. I know I passed along some information to you to let you have a chance to look at it, but also there's a copy that I left on the dais just for discussion purposes, but suffice it to say that, that we did go out and do some measurements in the field just to confirm what we thought, and the number of parking spaces that we're talking about, if every single corner were to be done up and down Main Street, would be about 15. Even could be a little bit less, but I'm not going to get your hopes up on that, but it really just depends on how exactly everything lays out. There are, no, I don't, I mean, I have them.
It's just happy talk.
Yeah, it's from the streetscape plan. So one of the questions that came up was A, what the level of public involvement, and I think that it speaks towards what you have there. But also, the streetscape plan did, I thought, a very good job of framing what the issue is, and my personal issue, and I'm not sure where everyone stands on it, but my personal issue is the pedestrian safety. And we've talked about that.
Such a major achievement for the village in terms of pedestrian safety.
Can't hear you, I'm sorry.
I said it would be a major achievement
yes.
in terms of pedestrian safety.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll get closer to the mic.
Yeah, good.
And I know I had made some references to the idea that whether any of this goes forward, that there needs to be another look at how the crosswalks are laid out in relation to where the parking is. There's a few intersections, more than a few, that are virtually impossible to navigate, even the most agile of pedestrians. So I think we really have to look at that regardless, and this will kind of force the issue. So it laid out that issue. It also laid out an issue of gathering spaces and public places. I put it in there in case you wanted to see it, but it wouldn't be a reason to spend. Wouldn't be a reason to spend.
Compelling reason.
Yes, exactly.
It's safety and sight lines and.
Yeah, and traffic calming also, because the constriction.
With traffic calming, I didn't see anything in the report that talked about the ability of larger trucks to be able to get up and down Main Street. At least as easy. I can't imagine it's going to be as easy. It's already difficult
Right.
for, whether it's a large mail truck or it's a large delivery truck that's coming down. With these bump outs, is that going to make it hard?
Yeah, I don't think the bump outs are far. They're not into the lane of travel. The level of constriction that you have when you're navigating Main Street is more of a visual thing, and it puts the pedestrian out closer to the roadway for a shorter crossing, which is really where their level of safety is. The traffic calming effect is really the sense that the roadway is constricted somewhat, but I think you have that sense already with all the cars, frankly, with all the cars that are parked. So this doesn't come out beyond the end of the cars.
Oh, for sure, now we're at the end.
Right.
What is it, 5 feet?
I think it's 8, I think it's,
The parking is, what, 8 or 9 feet?
I think it's 8 feet, at least on this side of the road. I don't know the measurement on the other side of the road. Yeah, the diagonal side's about 8 feet, which isn't even the full length of a car.
So Larry, wouldn't it be,
Right.
Larry, wouldn't it be similar to the Aqueduct Crossing extension? So
Right.
there's the same truck that passes that, comes
Right.
down the street and passes these other ones.
Except,
But that's one bump out.
well, that's
And
one,
then the Ferris Street here.
right, well, but except you only have the bump out on the north side of Main
you're right,
Street at the
yeah, you're
Aqueduct
right,
Crossing.
yes,
You would
right,
have
right.
a bump out, but it's, again, a fairly modest one on the south side that would come out, not quite to the edge of the cars. In front of the aqueduct, in front of the monument, the bump out, actually, I probably would want it a little bit more constrained there, because you still have the phenomena of people passing you as you're waiting to turn into the aqueduct lot,
Yes.
which I purposely try not to hug the center line. I like to be comfortably in the lane and not let people do that. That's incredibly dangerous, as you can imagine, with the crosswalk right there. So, but as far as trucks navigating and making turns and turning radiuses, that as Connie mentioned, the radius that we're using on the curb and the dimensions that we have almost perfectly match the turning dimensions on the island where the monuments are. So, and it was, you know,
You tested it.
we tested it. I mean, frankly, you know, our fire trucks, for example, I mean, I don't know that a 18-wheeler will be able to get in there, but it's just as well. I don't think we want those on our side streets. But anyway, the radius match, so.
So one truck is coming up and one truck is going down on Main Street, and there are bump outs on two sides. They can
Somebody
still
has to
pass.
The lane, well, no,
And
but
it's slow.
well, no, but the lane widths, there's no reduction
Right, that's what I
in the
mean.
lane widths that are currently there.
Right,
The
that's
lane
fine.
widths are tight depending on how big the vehicles are parked
Anyway,
diagonally, so, which is a whole different issue that we're not tackling tonight.
yeah.
But this doesn't further constrain it. It does from a visual standpoint, but not from a physical standpoint.
So did you want us to make some decision on this? or-
Well, yeah, I think there's one more
Okay,
question.
go ahead.
Maybe, no?
Was there a budgetary analysis refined?
Yeah, no, what we were given by our engineers is that it's roughly $50,000, $50,000 per intersection. And there's a total of 6 intersections that are being looked at here. It's going to be plus or minus, you know, but that's about the number, between 250 and 300,000. You know, again, that's not, obviously, that's not a small number, but in comparison to constructing those corners with the variety of conditions that we have with those handicap ramps and all that, and then coming in and changing that later seems incredibly wasteful. So this seems a little bit more opportunistic. And, you know, I think that there are opportunities. We do have a $125,000 grant under the New York State and municipal funds, which are kind of the replacement for the member items that our members used to have in Albany. And so we have that for 2 brick crossings. I think we talked about it at the work session.
How much, I'm sorry?
$125,000 for 2 brick crossings and the hopefully the LED indicators once they're in. And I think that's a pot of money that is still there and we could look at. So I don't know that it'll offset the whole thing, and I don't know whether we'll get it, but there's certainly opportunities. So.
I think this is a very sound plan, accounting for a number of issues we want to address.
Yeah.
And the timing is right, because to do it the other way is just
It
dumb.
didn't seem right.
I would almost think that doing the bump outs might actually reduce the requirement for the crosswalk signaling.
Yeah.
I mean,
Possibility.
could, possibility. I'm not saying, but if you're going to use the same pot of money, it only goes once.
Yeah. Good point.
Explain again, I didn't quite understand.
If you make the bump outs such that people are actually able to go safely out almost to the end of the car and to be seen, then maybe the necessity for having flashing lights on the crosswalk will be mitigated.
Okay, and then that
Right.
can help
And then the
the
money's
money
available.
move to the other bump outs.
I mean, it would be nice to try it
Nice-
once to see,
Yeah, it'd be nice to have it.
but I think maybe the overall benefit of the bump outs probably far exceed 1 or 2 sets of flashing lights on Main Street, if you know what I'm saying.
Right. And they're not cheap. The LED and the signalization and all that is probably 20, it's
And they're not,
25 to
they're
30.
unattractive. This is
Yeah.
on every level, just a better visual and accomplishes the goal.
So it becomes part of the budget?
Yeah, we'll incorporate this in the plans. Our engineers are just waiting for an answer, so. Well, the funding of it we'll deal with during the capital budget, for sure, to make sure we have that placeholder there. The plans themselves, the engineers will
It
take care of.
reiterates the, you know, certainly, we're not diminishing the effect of 15 parking spots. I mean, this is, we know people in the public, businesses will be concerned about that, and I feel bad about that, but then I balance that against the pedestrian safety issue and the ADA issue, and I think we just have to somehow
The
make it
ADA
work.
thing is really
It-
kind of
it-
embarrassing, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, it's more than,
yeah. It's bad.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and the ADA spaces that we have, you can say that we have ADA spaces up and down Main Street, but with the exception of the one right here in front of Town Hall, none of them are built to any sort of standard. There's basically lines that are painted in blue with
Right, just right.
and that's it. There's no relief
Don't park here
areas.
'cause it's for handicapped.
Right, and there's no relief areas that are proper, so all of that
Aren't really handicapped.
is going to get taken care of.
So we're doing the right thing, and I hope our businesses can adjust and we'll do what we can to help them.
I mean, as much as the summer and the fall gas line construction was an annoyance, and it certainly was, it kind of told us that if we lost 15 spaces, I think we're going to be able to adjust to that, and I think our residents will adjust to it, and the pedestrians walking on Main Street will be safer because of it. So whether this
It's also more
opportunity...
spread out than that one too, so you should, I feel like it should be.
Yeah.
I think the trade-off with safer walking is going to make
People come
people
to
more
town.
comfortable in town, right?
Right,
So there's
you
gotta be
could, you could consider sending your 12-year-old, across the street from on Buckout Street.
Assuming people stop jaywalking.
Well, yeah.
Well, once all those beautiful lines are there, it'll be.
Arrows crossing.
Well, look, I mean, I hate to be just anecdotal about it, but if I'm walking down from the Aqueduct parking lot where I park my car, and there's cars parked along the south side of Main Street near the old this and that, near the insurance agent, right? I would much prefer to walk down in front of the firehouse and cross down there than cross at that crosswalk, which is jaywalking.
Yeah.
But there's no sight, if there's cars parked there, there's no sight line.
Yeah,
Totally. And so,
you park.
I mean, to me...
Jaywalking, but you can see.
Yeah, exactly. From the firehouse, I can wait as long as I want. I can see in both directions up and down the hill. Up there, I can't. So, anyway, that's...
So you're confessing to jaywalking now?
Of course.
We do it almost every meeting.
Every time we get pizza.
And I tell you, the other place that...
Larry, thank you for this.
Yes.
The other place everyone jaywalks is to get to Jordanes.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's a lot dicier, though.
Hop across, yeah.
I don't know if I was...
That's not for visual aid, that's for...
All right.
So Larry, you could go down to Ferris Street and then back up a few.
Yeah, well, I'm lazy, so...
Well, let's stay in shape.
Yeah.
Reports of boards, standing committees and officers, trustee liaison reports? Mark?
I only had one report in general.
Okay.
And that was that trying to work with the GPTF to get them to, if they're going to some of these events, like the harbor flood study presentation that happened last week, to get them to write some stuff up and they can give us a report back to on it rather than have all that information lost. The other thing, I'd just like to thank Larry and the building inspector. The dark sky compliant lighting is actually in place on the library at this point.
Oh.
So it cuts down significant glare.
Yep.
So,
And they were very responsive.
Yeah. No, it just took time to get the things ordered.
so thank you on that.
Doc?
Handbooks for Teenscape are now available at Parks and Rec office. It's going to be summer. Special thanks to IASC for co-sponsoring the off-season winter Teenscape trip to the Mystery Room at the Palisades Mall last Friday. 6th, 7th, and 8th graders all attended. Registration for 2019 youth baseball and softball is still open. There are limited team openings for the 2019 adult softball leagues if you're interested in playing. It's an over 40 league, a co-ed league, and an open league. That starts in April. Contact Mike DiNardo. Dates and fee schedules for the 2019 summer day camp has been released. Job applications for positions in the summer day camp are also available. Residents are asked to please pick up and take their dog bags with them when they're in the woods or at Halsey Pond. The amount of bags people leave behind on the ground is staggering, and remember, dogs must be on leash. Residents are urged to respect the signs that the fields are closed. Staff is working hard to prepare for the spring and needs time and cooperation to get there and get the work done properly. And last, the Executive Board of ISCAB meets tomorrow morning, March 19th at 8 a.m. in the Senior Center.
I've lost track of which week the farmers market is. The farmers market this week.
Second and fourth,
Second and fourth through March, I believe.
Saturdays.
Yeah.
So when is the next one?
I think it's next weekend.
That would make
Brian
it-
will get it.
That would make it not this week, but
All right, I'll go.
It's March 23rd, I have
it
on
is
the
March
calendar.
23rd. Thank you, Leola.
We love collecting food scraps.
All right, should I go?
Sure, if you're ready.
Oh, okay, so this is Greg Nielsen's, storm number 16 was on Sunday. I won't review all the back ones.
Right.
But the other, you know, we have the municipal sharing agreement to get the pothole killer, and the pothole killer is here.
Right.
Had good,
Today.
I saw some results.
Did it kill pots?
It killed some pots.
Yes. Not using the kitty litter style.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about
Patch.
that. That seemed,
Yeah, that's
No.
that wasn't accurate.
No, that's fine, good.
that's
okay.
not the patches we're using.
No, these are hot patches, not cold patches.
Yeah, this is.
That's the point of having the
All
machine.
the villages share the expense of this, and it has certain days assigned to each community. So we got ours, I don't know if we get 1 day or 2 days.
As long as we need them.
As long as we
Well,
need 'em.
it'll probably be 2 days, maybe more.
Yeah, as opposed to the amount of labor that it takes to do that without a machine.
I just think of all those litter boxes that don't have to be.
Oh, right, all those kitty litter boxes.
Yeah, well, the important thing is that these are hot patches, so they are much more permanent, and last, through even beyond a season, a year, more, as opposed to the stuff that breaks up and ends up in your wheel well
Yeah.
when you're driving.
Right. Okay, so there were other things about clearing trees that were blocking Broadway at two different locations, Arley Avenue West, Station Road, West Sunnyside Lane. There were deliveries to Halsey Pond, and there was a repair of a catch basin on North Broadway by 120 North Broadway. Except that the Theater Commission is meeting tomorrow night. I don't think I have any other announcements.
Mine is just from the library. The really exciting stuff first. Mold remediation work started today by ServPro and will take 2 to 3 weeks. This will be covered by insurance, but that's part of the long plan, working with the housing development people. The Friends Literary Scavenger Hunt fundraiser last Friday raised almost $3,600. Saturday's program on learning to use e-devices by Oz Kodo Chang, a former reference librarian, had a great turnout of 16 people or so. Another one will be planned. And the Bridge Group is off and running and extremely popular. There is a bit of a delay in the catalog migration plan, which was announced last time, but stay tuned. And there was a presentation, Someone Must Wash the Dishes, a play presented by the Historical Society and the library, talking about all the reasons why the 20th Amendment should not have been passed and all of the reasons to reject those reasons, and apparently it was very well attended and quite lively.
You mean the 19th Amendment?
19th, women voting, 20th.
I thought it was the 19th Amendment. It is the 19th, sorry, I look it up on.
I'm more of a 21st Amendment guy, which is for appeal of pride.
Okay, whichever it was.
Whichever it was.
Giving women the vote.
I was also for that, by the way.
Oh, you were there in.
As long as they don't drive, I don't care what happens.
Or maybe it was 1919, maybe it was 1919 in the 20th Amendment.
Or 1920 in the
19th Amendment,
Oh,
okay.
That's a good one.
All right.
Village Administrator's report.
So tomorrow afternoon, village staff has I guess it's a tabletop exercise, but it's a meeting with Con Edison Emergency Response. They're very helpful, actually, to come in and have a refresher on that. Hopefully we don't need it this year. Later on in the week, I'll be meeting with a prospective candidate for village prosecutor. Our existing prosecutor has expressed a desire not to do prosecutions anymore, so we're going to be moving on. And last thing is that we're still on track for later this month to have some communication out to the community about the new parking regulations and have the revised signs be up and running and enforced. Well, with a grace period, which we expect.
So there were some new signs up I saw about the alternate side, but were the little stickers put on yet some places that say 2 hours as opposed to 6? No.
Shouldn't have been.
Okay, no, I didn't see those, so I didn't.
Those were, we didn't tell anyone yet.
But there are new ones that say, parking 8 to 10 on certain streets. They look very new.
Don't know, but those are gonna be looked at to be modified anyway if we can change the law to make it be a narrower window.
Okay, well, walk down Ferris Street
Okay.
and tell me if they aren't new.
Okay. I'll look.
So talking about, this reminded me, talking about public education, outreach, communication, we've been talking about, there's another GPTF about how it's really important to let people in the village know that actually recycling is viable in Westchester County.
Oh, right.
Amongst, you send stuff around to us,
Right.
but there's a lot of people have been commenting on the Atlantic article, and it's been on the news everywhere, and
Sure.
blah, blah, blah. And so it's very important that people realize that because the county does dual streaming, that it's actually
Valuable,
keeps it's still valuable and important to do. So again, GPDF is going to be working on some sort of communication that we'd like to be able to get out to the village, just to continue to encourage and make sure, summarize this, basically say, you've probably heard this, but you know what?
Yeah, makes sense.
And I do think it's a good reminder to try to reuse and reduce, so we don't have to recycle if you can. So. You've done, Mike?
That's it.
Village Clerk Treasurer's Report. Village Attorney's Report. Public comment.
After you?
Go ahead.
You want the mic? Sure, thanks.
Thank you.
I feel like I'm against everything I just heard. The bump outs concern me. Since the first one was put in, I at least once a week test it out. Number one, when you make a U-turn there, I don't care what they measured, you're a little intimidated, so you cannot go in as far without hitting the curb to make that U-turn when you're cutting into the side street.
U-turn. You can't U-turn.
Yes, on the street.
You are allowed, but maybe we should.
There are certain streets you can make U-turns on, and certain ones that are marked no U-turn. This happens to be one you can where the bump out is, so I was able to test it. I agree that the bump outs for children certainly are better. I think for adults, we would walk out to the end of a car, and particularly if they painted it a little more noticeably, so maybe the kids would see that. For the kids, it's better, but I don't think it's better. What happens with drop-offs on Main Street, which now that we're taking away spots, allowing longer parking, which means possibly less spots to pull in to drop someone off. When they did the Memorial Plaza, that was a place you could drop off a child or an adult if necessary. If you want to drop someone off on Main Street, let's say, pick Jordanes, that seems to be a popular name, and there's no parking spot, you used to at least be able to pull in where the bump out is going to be for a minute or two to let the person out who needs to go to the bank or any of those shops. So I think that's a problem. You can't double park, you can't stop because it's a one-lane each-way street. How will that be handled? That's my concern. Also, the 15 spots lost. That's a major concern, too. But the drop-off, I think, is a safety issue. I don't know if it's been looked at or thought about. So, that's it. Thank you.
Well, I actually have a problem when people do the drop-offs in a crosswalk. Like, to me, it's, pull to the side street, pull off. Like it's,
You cannot pull into the side street. You try and turn around on the side streets. I've tried it.
I do it every day. I do it.
Very
every week.
difficult.
It might be difficult, but
Very
to me, it's
difficult.
also difficult to cross a street when someone's stopped at the crosswalk. And the problem is, people don't just pull over in those crosswalks to let someone off very quickly. They sit there and they go to Chase Bank and they let their car run. They, I see a lot of things that I'd rather have a bump out there than not have that block. But
All right.
it's all a matter of opinion, I guess.
Okay.
Many of the drop-off points have fire hydrants also, so I'm not sure they should be used that way.
Right.
I also would like to request, I don't think it belongs necessarily, that they add a few more handicapped spots on Main Street.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see what the ratio should be.
Yeah, no,
And there's
it'll be appropriate.
there's still the 15-minute spots are gonna be marked for 15 minutes, so.
Yeah, that hasn't changed.
That
Right.
doesn't change. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's, no, I thought,
No, you're next.
no, there was another comment, sorry, we don't want to.
Okay, I had thoughts about the bump outs too, and I would imagine, Larry, you already considered all this, maybe it's not ADA, but I also have become aware that just paint sometimes, if the crosswalk is a solid green or red, you create traffic calming and more visibility to pedestrians. I don't know how that relates to the ADA piece, but I guess that could be a concern about bump outs.
Right, well, there are two crossings that we have slated to be the brick pattern, like we have up at the Aqueduct, which is increased visibility.
Mhm.
So, I mean, and
Don't fade.
and
Well,
don't
the
fade,
thing
right.
with the ADA was that, given the hill, they were going to go down at an odd angle and not even, I don't know
Not even
quite how
meet
to
on the
describe
other
this.
side.
They weren't gonna meet the
Ah.
edge in order to be compliant. It was gonna be this skewed, crazy
So it's gonna have to
thing.
go on an angle.
You would have,
This is actually much more.
if you look at the picture,
Yeah.
you would say, we can't possibly do this.
This
Just
is,
look at it.
that's a layout based
That's what
upon.
we would have to do if we didn't do this.
Okay, interesting.
With bump outs, it's a little bit more uniform,
Yeah.
more obvious where people are supposed to be walking,
So in
especially if
order-
you're
in order-
visually impaired.
Yeah, well, I'll just look to your expertise on that, but if we needed a cheaper way to go, paint might
Sure.
do it if we didn't have enough money. And also, in terms of the crossing guard issue, just wanted to do a quick reminder that the additional half hour of crossing guard could serve the purpose on the short term. And then the longer term, we have the safe walking and biking and motor transit, efficiency for Route 9 corridor planning as well. And I like win-win, a Broadway for everybody, ages 0 to 100, and where everyone could walk, bike, and efficiently drive their car through. And so we have that project, and I was, as a committee member there, I was very, very, very proud of Irvington's interest in coming out to understand what that's about, and Mark and the traffic committee's further review of it. So that's just a plant to seed for the future. Perhaps we won't need these crossing guards anymore if we have really great infrastructure. So maybe that's temporary.
I will say that the Heritage Hill intersection, although we haven't done our enhancements yet, it is the one that has a full four-way stop. So to me, it's much safer than most places. Like if you're willing to wait, it's actually very safe. And I do it every day because, especially if you go, usually go around 7:30 when school's there's traffic going all the time. So you have to wait for it, but it's a full four-way stop.
Yeah.
And it's enough time that it's completely safe, as opposed to, somewhere it's like, on Main Street, it's not great because you still have a green light,
Yeah,
you gotta
right.
figure it all out. But that one is actually.
So you could actually go at a diagonal because it's all
No,
stopped?
you just go straight across. But you could do it diagonal, but you just go straight, the way it's striped now is only one.
And that's in contrast to the Harriman Road
Right, there's
intersection,
not even a-
which there's not even, there's buttons, but there's not signage,
Right.
lights for.
Yeah, to me, the Heritage Hill is the only one that's the way it should be.
Right.
And that's what they're talking about the crossing spot.
That's right. That's right.
Seems to me like we should be able to get don't walk signs on some of these other intersections, but I don't know what the constraints about.
It's up to the state.
It's a state.
Up to
Is it
the
really a
state.
state decision?
Broadway.
They control all the signalization.
Janice, I think we've gone overtime and they turned the heat off. I'm freezing too.
On, apparently.
So I'll just make one very broad brush thing that I've been wanting to point out budget-wise, and really for every expense of the village. and don't feel singled out. I stand up and say this everywhere I can in the parks and rec meetings and everything. So, you know, scientists concur that we may only have 10 or 12 years to stop contributing to fossil fuel burning and all that stuff that is creating climate change, and we may not have a livable planet in 10 to 12 years, is what many of the projections say. And so Irvington in the past has made commitments to being a climate-smart community, to moving forward on the Paris Climate Accord, whether our federal government is or not. And I just wanted to ask that in every budget expense, in everything that we're doing, if we could be mindful of the effect on the environment and climate change, because this is one of those all-in things that we've got to do. Business as usual is not going to work anymore. And so I would just ask, I'll write to the school. I was happy to hear some of the measures in the budget there, but the sheds that they're looking for fossil fuel vehicles, you probably need a shed for an electric vehicle, you know, those sort of things, because we will need to change to non-polluting sources of energy really soon. So I'll just ask you to keep that in mind in every single decision. I don't think we have a choice.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any action items, Larry?
I mean, there's certainly the follow-up on the crossing guard for the budget, but that's,
That's
I
it.
think that's it.
I'll make a motion to adjourn if I get a second. All in favor?
Aye.